Hello. Yeah. Hey, thank you. Okay, good afternoon, folks. I hope everybody's recovered from lunch. Um, we are not too far away in Maryland after lunch here with Andrew Cozy. Andrew's committee consisted of Michael Esmond with that nice cup of coffee, and Joseph Williams right next to him, who you heard from just prior to lunch. And we're going to be looking at the next three projects have a lot of relationship to water, or the lack thereof relationship with water, and with natural environment, and the play between natural environment and architecture. And this is why Denny said before lunch, well, maybe I should leave. And I said, no, please don't leave. This is perfect. So this is glad that he's a landscape architect, so we like him.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Andrew Cozy, and this is Designed Wild, cultivating connections to the natural world through architecture. So, growing up, I spent a lot of time outdoors, camping, hiking, fishing, and through this, developed a love, respect, and an affinity for the natural world. And that's why one particular trip to Tuckahoe was surprising to me. So, Tuckahoe State Park. I traveled over there on a summer's day for a fishing trip, went down to the creek, and as I scrambled down the banks, I noticed something that was kind of unsettling to me. Um, all the banks were just scattered with trash, all these man-made things just littering this natural place. And as I was picking it all up, I was thinking to myself, how could people be so careless? If only they cared more or knew more about the natural world, maybe then we could change their behavior. So for those of you who don't know, Tuckahoe State Park is on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's located on the border of Queen Anne and Caroline County, situated on Tuckahoe Creek, which is a tributary to the Choptank River and ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. So zooming into this, we could see that Tuckahoe State Park is surrounded by agricultural fields. Even within its boundaries are fields. And as you can imagine, the area didn't always look this way. Prior to the park's construction in the 1970s, there was no dam on Tuckahoe Creek. Also, following this, there was no lake either, but they dredged out 63 acres to create what they call Recreation Lake 1. It was one of three planned lakes, but only the first one ever materialized. And finally, they deforested this area and replanted it with loblolly pines as per best forestry practices in the 70s. So seeing where the red arrow is where the dam is located. You could imagine that the site probably looked something more like this around that time, 75 years ago. But despite this, Tuckahoe State Park now is actually seeming to thrive after all these changes. I say this to reframe your thinking. Intervention usually has a pretty negative connotation, like all your friends and family are waiting in a room waiting to tell you how much your addiction is hurting them. But it's possible for human intervention to change landscapes and be beneficial for both humans and nature. And to further illustrate this, I'd like to bring up a few points. So Tuckahoe State Park is recognized as an important bird area by the National Audubon Society, and it's home to over 229 different bird species, and it provides critical habitat for two specific bird species, which are nearly extinct in Maryland. It's also home to Adkins Arboretum. This is a rich preserve effort, which is home to over 600 species of Maryland native plants. And it's open to the public for free, inviting people of all ages to participate in programs and engage people with nature with things like nature journaling classes to summer camps. Following this, due to the rare species which inhabit Tuckahoe State Park's wetlands, the wetlands are designated as a wetlands of special concern by the Maryland Department of the Environment. And this point is particularly fascinating if you consider the fact that these wetlands didn't exist prior to the human intervention. The upstream habitat of Tuckahoe State Park is also an important spawning ground for fish which breed upstream but live in the ocean. And this is particularly important because the Maryland striped bass um, does that. And so this is an important waterway not only because of the wetlands that occur in it, but also because it's important to the recreation culture of Maryland. So this goes to show that although the area has undergone radical change due to human intervention, it's not something that's necessarily malicious. In fact, the idea that we can construct something where both humans and nature benefit and exist symbiotically is something that we should ultimately strive for in every build project. And what better place to test a thesis that does this than Tuckahoe State Park? So despite the successes of Tuckahoe State Park, it doesn't have a visitor center currently. And this leads me to the existing state of visitor centers. You know, we've all seen these buildings governed by the parkitecture style, as it's called. And many of these buildings suffer from the same problem. They usually focus on one privileged view, and they try to simulate the experience of nature through these indoor use of dioramas and pamphlets to educate visitors. So this diagram shows the existing state of visitor centers. They have an inward focus with a view out to nature in order to simulate this experience. But the proposition for this thesis is to decentralize the visitor center, to allow the park to become the visitor center. This allows for more curated experiences that you wouldn't be able to get in one place. And importantly, it allows architecture to facilitate the formation of new embodied experiences and therefore emotional connections to the landscape. People experiencing these feelings are what make them ultimately care about something. So upon studying the site, I found within it 7 distinct communities, each with their own distinct characteristics. The first being the recreation lake, the next being the controlled wetland, called that because the lake is dammed, so the water level fluctuates less, and therefore the wetland that occurs along the banks isn't a thin strip because there's not water constantly moving very far and very upstream and down, or upland and downland. Third is the manicured lawn because this area is just that, a manicured lawn, followed by the picnic forest, which is one of these loblolly forests that was planted, but then with its understory cleared out to allow for a shady picnic area, followed by the parking area, which actually serves as the boundary between the managed loblolly forest and the unmanaged one, which I refer to as the fitness forest, because there's this 5 mile long trail which subdivides this area in a pretty extreme way as you cut back and forth to it in this 5 mile trail, predominantly used for just hiking and running. And then finally, what I'm calling the reclaimed forest, because it's an area that was an agricultural field, but is now being planted with saplings to restore a Maryland native forest. So this brings me to the site plan. This proposition includes a station for each zone, meaning 7 stations in total, all designed to enhance a visitor's understanding of the site and their connection to it. It includes a reworking of this whole portion of the site in order to expand the wetlands by introducing this creek here, which would allow the soil to become saturated and allow wetland plants to grow. And to change this currently manicured monoculture lawn into a more meadow type condition where wildflowers and other native plants can grow. This not only is done for aesthetic purposes, but also enhances the resilience of the site because the surrounding conditions are very agricultural and these plants are great at capturing nitrogen runoff, as Rory mentioned earlier. So moving through the stations themselves, we're going to start at the farthest left one and work our way down, and as we move along the trail. So the first one that we'll look at is that one, as I said. So zooming in, it is oriented. It's a boardwalk that projects out into the lake and it orients you as you're standing there to look out at the dam. When we get closer, we could see these columns flanking either side of this boardwalk, which indicate the previous location of Tuckahoe Creek before it was dammed. And The station provides ample room for people to gather and enjoy the unfamiliar experience of being out in the middle of the lake. And on the dock, there would be a QR code that you could sign or scan with your phone that would allow visitors to see the way that this place looked before the dam was created through augmented reality on their phone. And this is intended to act as a tool for us to acknowledge our impact as humans and see how drastically we changed the landscape in this location in particular. Station 2 is a small extension on the boardwalk which leads users out to the wetlands and allows them to be immersed in an ecosystem which usually has a bad reputation. Swamps and wetlands are kind of the settings for horror stories usually, and they always are the place where witches live, and this station offers an opportunity for you to see otherwise. The station has a bird blind type opening, which gives the users a wide angle view of the environment outside without disturbing the wildlife. And it also features an open platform, which could be used as a viewing deck or a dip netting station. This rendering shows a feature that I imagine would be present in all of the stations, that farther one. An engraving etched into the wood of the structure, which contains an educational tidbit about things that you might see in the area if you're at the station. Station number 3 is located in the meadow area where the wildflowers and grasses grow, and you descend into this one to become eye level with the topsoil layer. This gives users a unique perspective, a rare chance to see below the surface we walk on. It forces users to think about things that we don't usually see or think about. Yeah. Yes. This slide was for me to go back through it. So yeah, so we went station 1, station 2, station 3, and now we are heading into station 4, and then we'll proceed down to 5, 6, and 7 all the way at the end. Yeah. So that slide was just to reorient ourselves, so perfect timing. So zooming in, we can see that Station 4 is a small tower that intends to tie into the language of the tall, vertical loblolly pines of the forest while providing a screened view out towards the lake and into the forest. And we can see that the corner posts of this structure are a similar scale to that of the trees, but the viewing platform puts the visitor in the canopy rather than above it like most observation towers would. And this allows visitors to occupy the canopy and see life that usually occurs above our heads, and it makes this place a great opportunity to observe some of those wonderful species of birds that inhabit Tuckahoe. So going back to the site plan again, we're now moving on to station number 5, this one, which is the first one that you would see upon your arrival at the parking lot. And this station functions like an extension of the canopy. Its pre-curved CLT structure curls down to support itself around existing trees, which allows the structure to stand by itself within the environment without disrupting the trees that exist there already. And as you can see here, there are 3 main openings which allow this to happen, and it allows the structure to stand within but independently from the forest. And this structure is also constructed in 8-foot modules, as you can see in this drawing, that are all less than 50 feet long, that allow this to be prefabricated off-site and then brought over on semis and erected around the trees that are currently there. The smaller pods that you can see are created are accessible restrooms, and the larger module of this building is the main reception area. And the large canopy serves as a meeting space for larger groups such as school kids or any other groups that may need to come to this place to get oriented. It's ultimately the staging grounds for any larger groups that come and visit the site. Next, the penultimate station, station number 6, located in the middle of the fitness forest, acts as the bridge between the existing fitness trail and the new trail, which I've implemented on the site. And upon entering, the choice to proceed downwards or upwards is yours. And as you pass through this section, you'll catch glimpses of the environment as you traverse either upwards or downwards. And either way, it'll put you a couple of feet above or below the forest floor, allowing you, once again, new perspectives on environments that you've already been in. Think about standing in a small mound, on top of a small mound in a forest clearing where you can see 2 feet higher or 3 feet higher than you usually do. It's not a huge dramatic change, but it changes your perspective once more. So Here are some renderings showing that. And finally, on the last station, this is the most modest and unintrusive station of all of them. It's placed in an area that's being reclaimed from the agricultural land, and the idea is that due to this dense planting pattern, a lot of the trees will die, and because of the competition as others grow. And this station can conform to those changes and ultimately grow with the site. The station's made of simple sawn logs organized into seating and stage areas, which allow for easy manipulation as a building material, and it can be found locally with minimal effort. And as people gather in this space over the years, it'll grow and transform with its surroundings, being moldable to whatever shape the forest takes. With a low-risk method of construction, it allows for trial and error with a stage and seating setup that can change depending on the user's needs. So overall, these places are intended to bring people closer to the natural world around them and serve as hosts for new memories and experiences in the outdoors. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your comments.
There we go.
First off, Andrew, great work. I really love that you kept to a very modest, as you say, scale of architecture. I can feel the intimacy of each of these places and how it loops to your personal experience with the site. So great job. I think for me, oh nice, the models help. The maybe bringing some of that tactility, some of that intimacy more into the perspectives by adding like materials. I think I hear in your presentation, like this is how people can experience the site and I'm so excited. And I think adding a little bit of like, what does it actually look like when you're there? Is it a wood that matches the trees or is completely different? Is it burnt? Is it raw? Does it also change with the seasons? That kind of thing I think would help. The models actually do a great job of illustrating this, so thanks for bringing those as well. But yeah, just how do we get some of that materiality into the drawings as well?
Right. Thank you.
I love the drawing technique. I don't know if you can see it better on the screen than you are drawing all of the matrix of the soil and the fish in the water. You're sort of considering what's above and below, but it feels almost as you spend as much time drawing the natural world as the architectural world. And I agree, at times we get footings and an idea about how we can scoop out and make space out of this ground. But then at other times we don't. And it's very, nebulous, the architectural language. And so agreed, I wish more of that vocabulary came out in your drawings. But overall, beautiful presentation. It's really elegantly conveyed.
Thank you.
Uh, I think it's a great, thank you for all the range of representations that describe this landscape. Obviously, it's a place that you love. You kind of developed this biophilia, early on, and I think you're kind of like, making this site, or you're giving kind of an homage to these experiences. One of the things I would like to see a little bit more is the analysis or understanding of what this experience is. You sort of touched upon it briefly in very broad strokes. Um, but that trail system, actually being on it, it would have been interesting to actually maybe think about a little bit more about what are these kind of conditions that you experience as an individual. I mean, this is really your project, and it's designed for you mainly, and for others to sort of eventually enjoy. So I think that would have been interesting because I'm not sure how to respond to why that place and not another one. I mean, you mentioned there's conditions of being on the water, which there's multiple places where you can get that. So that would have helped a little bit more to understand why you chose these places and not others. And the other thing is, I really like this kind of the architecture seems simple, but it's actually not, and I think it would require a lot of kind of investment. I think so. Maybe thinking a little bit more about what would be a low sort of threshold and maybe less sort of low investment sort of approach to this is, this guy, Rich Haig, who's a famous landscape architect in the Northwest, he said, landscape architecture is really about digging and piling. So then I think you've done that, right? Digging and piling, but I feel like you really need to, do we need a tower, or could that be achieved sort of differently? And do we need to actually, dig literally a hole in this kind of muddy landscape to sort of view things? It made me think about my friends at Temperance Alley in DC who do environmental education with children, and say very often they just kind of ask them to lay on the ground and look in a different direction, looking up at a plant versus looking at it at eye level makes a huge difference. So maybe it's more about those conditions. But I would like to hear a little bit more about what are these conditions that really get us then to buy into, because your starting point was stewardship, how to take care of the landscape. And what are these conditions? I still don't know. Being above something, looking at it, does it really, or is it prospect refuge? Is it being protected by the landscape as you look out? So being a little bit more deliberate, I think, would help us then buy into, I think, what is a beautiful, very poetic project. But, without those premises, it's hard for me to buy into the story without being there.
In many ways, I agree. There seems to be an interesting mix of something that's just arbitrary, right? And also at moments fascistic. I mean that in the best sense. So like you have, earlier I kind of referred to it as a Stations of the Cross. Is there a procession? Is there a promenade to this that you want a user, or can they go? I mean, obviously they can go to any place, but is there a preferred narrative that you want to tell?
Not particularly. There's no real order to what I would want people to go through, as long as they are taking these trails, enjoying the different sites, appreciating the landscapes that's there. Um, it's not super important to me in what order they do that.
Then I would ask, since each one of your little buildings, each one of which is incredibly elegant, okay, I especially like that one. Okay.
That one's my favorite too.
Yeah, I especially like that one. But as an object, as a kind of, like the model is beautiful, right? But then I kind of wonder, where is the place where you just sit down and take in the whole site without it being choreographed? And this is truly a project, I think, and an intention, kind of where the less you do, the lighter the touch, it would seemingly be better. And I don't know. You've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it now for 10 minutes. You've been thinking about it for a year, right? Okay. So I don't really know that, but those are the questions I would ask you. Like, where do I just sit down?
Yeah.
Where is it not being so controlled, right? Where do I come upon something in a clearing and have those kinds of experiences? Beyond that, I have to agree with what's already been said. You've done a beautiful job. You've thought about it. You presented it well. Each one of your little pieces is incredibly elegant.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I think that, just to respond a little bit to that, I think following along with what was said previously, those moments to breathe and wait and take in everything, I think the folly was not paying enough attention to the path itself, because that's probably where those moments would happen. If you're going between the stations, there's likely some benches along the path, right? And that's where you sit and take everything in. And I think that's a really great point that you've both made about pay more attention to the more subtle areas as well, because there is respite and good things to be had in them. So thank you.
And there are times to be subtle.
Yeah.
There are times for you to be subtle and times for you to make a big statement. And I think balancing that would be great. But again, congratulations. It's really very nice.
Thank you.
Just want to say, yeah, I'm probably similar. I'm a sucker for folly projects or folly-like projects. So, but just to commend the presentation, I think a lot of people can learn from the quality of drawing, the quality of graphics, and composition, even just in the way that you presented the project, both digitally and on paper, and as well as in your model form. So kudos to that. I'm very appreciative of that. It's very
Thank you.
really good job. I do wish on certain just kind of just to piggyback on what's already been said. I wish there was like one more panel, and that panel might be to touch on a few things. I think it was already touched about materiality. Materiality. I think there's like this moment where you've made a very conscious decision to say, hey, formally, this folly needs to feel this way, look this way, be designed in this such way, and it's like. But why not add that last layer of like, well, then really the materiality is a very important thing, and how that is, how that is composed with your environment. I think it would be great to visualize that. So that last panel could have been, that, and maybe that's the thing you do. Maybe the one last little step you do there. And then my other comment would be like going back to what you said about the visitor center. That was something that you criticized in a sense, to say, hey, this was like this one moment where you always go to this one building. It's very, it's not very intriguing. It's not very inspiring, and it's all in this one thing. It's introverted. But so to decentralize it, that was a big part, right? And I think this is going back to the same comment about those moments in between. When you say, when you decentralize it, that's when it gets exciting, right? That's when you actually are forcing the narrative that you, as a user, has to go into this environment, this large environment, and experience the whole thing, right? So that is when you maybe that last panel starts to talk about those nuances in between, because you're so focused on those beautiful objects, the intricate object. You were so focused on those, which is great, and they are beautiful. And those little moments in between, it's almost like you don't necessarily have to per se contrive them either. I don't think, or you don't, or suggest anything, or provide a prompt. But it's more just about that was part of the thesis, to decentralize. And why would that be special? It's not just about these nodes, it's about the moment in between and the procession in between, and that needs to be highlighted, even if it's not a built-in construct. And then last thing I'll just say is, similarly, that some of some of these follies fit where they go because they have to go there because of their context. And then there's a few that you can argue that if I put it over here, what's the difference? So it would be good is like, kind of similar. Each of these follies have a character, and they're on its own right, are an own character. It's in its own filmic context, right? So what can that thing be at that location, that direct location, to tie it back and say, that's why I did it there. And it can only really happen here because of that particular tree or that particular view. And that's why it's here. And that's why those things are designed. It's that one last little tie back that will allow you to justify that's why that's there. And that's why I made, even though you say, hey, I don't really care how you go there. It could be like, yeah, maybe you care about some things, and say, maybe you do care that they approach it this way. Maybe, and not to say that that's your choice, that's fine. But I think that sometimes you could care about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
My turn. Congratulations on a beautiful project. It's beautifully illustrated with such great clarity and vision. I think you've heard all the praises from everyone. I'm going to add a few more thoughts along some of the theme that you've been hearing about the intentionality of these pieces and their actual manifestation. First, I would say that I bought the entire thesis from the point of view of this is what a visitor center looks like, and it doesn't have to. And it's not really just about looking like, but feeling like. And I avoid those at all costs when I go to natural places. And I'm glad that you thought about how can I cover some of these experiences without having to do it this way. So the beginning of the thesis very convincingly deconstructs the whole thing and kind of disperses it through the landscape. I actually enjoyed your initial slides when you were showing, and I can see it even now in the cross sections here that are happening that are mapped into the plan. I was following in many ways. There was red lines in your screen that was describing this is what's happening in this section, and then this one here is like 5 miles long, kind of thing. I felt the scale of it. So in many ways, as dense as these interventions look here, or even on that beautiful model, I felt the sense of these being isolated in the landscape, which I think is an important reference to construct in one's mind when you look at these, because they do look like a lot on the page, But when you start to really visualize on within that scale, in that space, I think it starts to work better. And then that led me to the next thing. And I think you're hearing from everybody, what's the materiality? What does this look like? Because it's so powerful in terms of its thematic and also formal articulation, but one wants to really see it in their minds, you know, and you render the natural element with such clarity, and then the architecture is somewhat subdued, but not really, because everything is rendered in the same gray white line actually makes it really stark and it stands out, and it stands out in its lack of definition. So I feel that's where a little bit of the disconnect happens, although we all understand that it was probably a visual communication kind of device that you used here in order to isolate sort of the design intervention from the natural environment. It's working. I think as a matter of next level, it's not even so much of like developing the structural kind of idea of it or the finish of it. I would challenge it to actually look at its materiality from the point of view of really the purpose of these. And you've heard it in some of these other kind of comments you heard earlier. So for example, some of these interventions you have, to me, feel more like land art, and others feel a little bit more like, oh, it's a building pavilion. And another one feels more like, oh, it actually enables you to see things in a different way, like that dugout with the earth kind of showing there. They're actually really different in what they do. I would say that the one here, number 6 or whatever it is, with the slatted walls is probably the least functional, right? That's the one that sort of reminds me as an intervention in the landscape that, you know, sort of provides a different lens of how you view it. So because of that, then it reminded me of one of my most favorite places that has a bunch of these is like Storm King in New York. If you haven't been to that park, I absolutely, like as a nature lover and as like all things art and architecture, you should go there because it is filled with massive amounts and sizes of art, but there are also buildings. There are these little pavilion structures, and sometimes you can't tell, am I going to another piece of art or am I going to a structure? But what's interesting about those is that someone mentioned earlier, the more minimal the intervention, the better. One of the favorites are like the 3 blades of Richard Serra walls coming out of this berm. And I can picture that metal rolling over and it just goes into the woods. I can describe to you every single bit of that multi-acre landscape. You know why? It's because of how these art pieces are placed and the kind of dialogue they create with the environment and the way it makes you look at nature, which is gorgeous by itself. But there's something in how these are placed, the specific type of art, how it's put, its materiality. There's that little mirror fence that's in the woods that makes all the difference in how you just construct the memory of that landscape in your head. Goldsworth is going into the lake and back out. So I feel like that's the next level of thinking about these structures and anything else designed into the future. I feel like you've responded to the landscape. You've given yourself the little tower, but we've seen a few of those. There's some really cool Marlon Blacknell. I'm sure you've looked at that one that goes up in the trees and it has a really cool room at the top. There's good examples of how each one of these work. The next level will be, how can I design them? And that includes the materiality, because that's where it really comes into play, in a way that make this landscape that much more special and memorable, that you would never picture that landscape ever again without it. That's when you're really starting to design for a place. Back to some of these other comments, why there and not there, and like all of that. It's because you've conceptualized the intervention, but you haven't really truly bonded it to the place yet. And those are the next level of thinking that you can, you know, let's say this is perfect, put a bow on it, done. But the next time you approach something with that kind of conceptual, sculptural kind of quality and clarity, just make that leap. Go to that next level and see what is that thing I'm designing that makes both things even better than what they are. Congrats again. Nicely
Thank you
done.
so much.
Talk about mine and your favorite pavilion. Which is your least favorite and why? That's number one. That's number one. I don't want to have to hold the microphone. And, and that drawing that's on, I think that would be a more powerful drawing if those little, cubes of butter were spread around in a drawing that shows kind of where they are on the site, right? Because I think for a number of us, there's the event of each thing, but not the story that holds them together. at all. And maybe there doesn't need to be. Okay. So anyway, back to what's your least favorite?
Okay, so the least favorite. Yeah, I would say probably station number 7. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's
I think
I
it's in the wrong spot.
yeah, potentially. Maybe that's why.
Just looking at your contour line. I really appreciate that you have contour lines, first of all, and second of all, that they go all the way into the water, which is brilliant. But I'm looking and just due south of you, there's a high point. So if you swung that down, and in general, I think your moments are too close to each other. I'm a runner, so I would be on this 5 mile path. And, I'd like them to be more like a mile apart. And so I could stop and pause and have a little water and then keep going. So to me, that belongs down here at the bottom right. Exactly. Take advantage of that contour. No, inside the contour. Move your hand. There you go. That's what that line means. High point. That's where that goes.
Um, yeah, I agree. That was something that I struggled with like the locations and how close are they to each other. A little bit of that was limited by how large the ecosystem each one of the different communities was. So some of them, like the kind of tighter grouping in the center, had to be that way a little bit because the Loblolly picnic forest is only so wide. So and then like the meadow is only so wide, so they kind of end up inherently being a little close to each other. But um, I thought about it in the way that, well, sometimes you might see one from the other one, and maybe that's what drives you on to the next couple of steps to maybe take a different route in the path or something like that. But yeah, thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing that I just made me this conversation made me think about is, first of all, the path is not really a given. You added to it, so this kind of ridiculously looking sort of zigzagging path you actually tagged along or attach yourself to, created extensions, and it made me think about maybe one way to interact with this landscape is to maybe cut this pathway, intercept it, and then find that as kind of a strategy, because I find that actually quite, sort of not very, not a human path. I mean, some planner must have done it, or some yeah, so intersecting and maybe even removing that axis might be the best strategy to then activate this kind of deep knowledge that you want. But that's all.
I think it is a great presentation, and I do like it graphically a lot. The thing I like about your pavilions is that they are somewhat anonymous, and to me, that humility lets the landscape be the scene. And I mean, there are questions from my practical brain of how would you hold that cantilever, and dumb things like that. But I do like that they're very anonymous and that they're quiet, because it puts the attention on to the landscape. The thing that I find lacking is that there would, to echo some of the other people, I kind of want a narrative on some level, because you talked about, well, this area was regrown, this area had the pine, this area had this, and that was all very interesting. And I feel like, if you were to present this to a future employer or some other prosaic thing like that, that they would want to understand more than just the graphic, more than just the aesthetic, but the things that you had alluded to and talked about, that, well, if you did go from one to the other, that, this was regrowing and this was about the dam and this was about this. And you're right. I don't like to be told where to go and when to go. But I also wouldn't mind a little more sometimes in a landscape. So I feel like that's sort of the one missing element in a way, is that, and you could actually leave it as is and attach that narrative afterwards, to help explain it down the road, that that this spoke to this and this spoke to that, and in this order, because you went 1, 2, 3, 4. So I thought, all right, let's go down 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when you said, well, you can do what you want, I thought, what's the point of the 1, 2, 3, 4? These are just landscapes, and which would have been fine. But I think that's the one thing I was looking for, was something like a story that brought it together a little bit. But it's an excellent job.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other route through. even though the path that you have looks really naturalistic, it's simply a defined path, right? This, I'm sure you've heard this in this school, that when you do urban design and you have a grid, the wonderful thing about the grid is now you have multiple ways of getting around. You can make a turn here, make a turn there, you can, avoid traffic here, blah, blah, blah. This looks natural, but in fact, it's the same thing as one long, very long, 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 long trail, right? And allowing alternatives, pathways through, would support your idea that it doesn't matter which one you get to because you come upon it, right? But right now, it looks as if there's, you get to it. And the other thing that concerns me is that every single one of them has this very specific view you're supposed to have, right? Versus where do you just get the view, right? And it's that kind of, that's why I said it has a certain fascistic nature to it, right? You get into it and I look through this little hole, right? And now I see this, right? I get to the top of the tower and I look that way, right? And I think the elegance of the buildings can, if you don't think of it as an object, as you think of it as an experience, that elegance can be brought to the experience as well, right? So again, I've thought about it for 15 minutes.
So this is a really beautiful project, Andrew, and I want to push back a little bit against Alan, your comments. Alan was my first critic, so that's my chance now. Taken me a long time. So, I was thinking the same thing when you were going station 1, station 2, station 3, Lapsed Catholic, and oh yeah, Stations of the Cross. Are we going to get to 14? But the word station, stationary, I think that's the whole point. That when you're either on a path and moving, or when you're in your place, you're sitting. Andrew's giving us these moments where he's saying, we can look here, but then it's the whole kind of thesis is that it's decentralized. So it's getting people moving. We all need to move more. Sitting's the new smoking, right? And that's what's nice about the project. I think the comments about kind of reconfiguring the network of paths are well taken. And then the representation and materiality comments, I think, are well taken too. The one thing I would add to that is that Stations of the Cross usually happen in late spring or late winter, early spring, and kind of it's like spring or summer in every representation. I want to see what these things look like in the dead of winter, in fall, as well as spring or summer. And I think that could be another panel that you had, but nice job.
Thank you.
Well done, Andrew. I have a quick thought. You mentioned that point about intervention. I thought that was very funny. One thing that's so interesting about your project is by decentralizing, you're embracing the idea that it's okay for man-made structures to be in the park, and that's not really desecrating the park. In fact, it's creating a more balanced ecology, maybe an ecology where we appreciate this park more. We don't throw trash into it. We actually try to keep it up because it's a nice place to hang out. I wonder if you could push that further and look at some of the ecological devices, ecology conservation devices. I'm thinking, for example, of bat towers. Are there any bats here?
Yes, there are.
Oh, good. Well, a bat tower, if you've never seen one, they're really funky looking. They're very stately. They have this odd geometry, and they're basically towers for bats to sleep in. And that generates a form for you, and you can play with that kind of new vocabulary that might be of inherent interest to people and have an educational function while doing the work of the conservation, while creating a happy, decentralized visitor center.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, and that's something that maybe the architecture became too much about humans, because that was something that in the very beginning I was like, I even said it, how do we design something that's beneficial for both? How do we do that? And doing things like that where, yeah, sure, I can make a tower if I want a tower, but maybe this tower is for bats. It's not for people. There are these relics in the landscape, but doing them for someone other than ourselves is a wonderful point. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for the great project and presentation. I would like you to think about the whole life cycle of vegetation, because when you go to forest, those trees are not always like that. Sometimes they might encounter the wildfire, something like that, and they will change into snack tree, something like that. So in that kind of situation, I people might have different experience when the forests are facing different phase of their life cycle. But when they turn into snack tree, that's not the end. They are trying to sacrifice themselves and to rehabitat the existing trees. So maybe you can think about how to engage that kind of life cycle of vegetation for learning experience, so that people who visit there can learn just not single pathway that you are suggesting, but it can be always like shifted depending on the current situation of the forest, so that you can change the experience for the visitors. So think about as a life cycle of the nature.
Thank you.
Andrew, great, we're here. We've had some really good discussions, I think, over the last year. Some of the best I've had with a thesis student. We had 3 months of philosophical conversation about the nature of nature and wild, and poking at questions and thinking about nature as a social construct and everything else, right? And I was really appreciated that you were on board to have those conversations, to question baggage that you were coming into it with, to question things that we all kind of inherit about what nature might be and what we think of it. And I also appreciate that your project really started in one place and went somewhere else, right? And that to me is sometimes the strength of thinking. It doesn't stay fixed on a certain idea. It's that the theme carries the work to a different place, and sometimes you kind of ride that theme, and sometimes you direct that theme. But it's been an interesting ride to be along with you on. I really enjoyed the conversation here, especially how so many folks were challenging the path itself, right? Which is fascinating. So much thought and effort goes into the making of the follies and the nodes, right? And then so much of the conversation was about the in-between, right? And so I'll just add to that. When I look at the site plan and I see the kind of unbroken brown line, I want to bring some of those same questions about materiality, about time, to the nature of the path itself, right? Because that really remains more undefined than anything here, right? We get glimpses of it as a boardwalk in certain areas, but then it's become gravel when it's more terrestrial. Is it dirt, right? And the questions of like the crunchiness of it all, or do you get dirt on your pant leg or whatever else, right? I know you're up for thinking and conversations at that level, because I see you with a real concern about the nitty gritty of it all. And so I just want to bring that as well. I'm one of the many people in the room here that know their project is never done. So I have no doubt that you will come back to this, whether it's directly attacking the site plan again or carrying this forward to new projects. I don't know, but it's been exciting and I really have enjoyed it, and congratulations.
Thank you.
So sorry. Pass the baton. Okay, we're going to face in this direction, and as you're changing directions, I was reminded of several years ago, maybe a decade ago, when Professor Bell and I were traveling after the Rome program in northern Italy that we ended up visiting. We ended up visiting the Sacromonte that are located around Varese, Varolo, those areas that are north of Milan. And Rudolf Wittgauer wrote about the relationship between those places and English landscape. And essentially they were a kind of glorified stations of the cross, put into a series of pavilions and dashed about the landscape. And the only outcome from that that's really notable at the end of the day, other than it sponsored a lot of ideas about English landscape and the triumphs of Whiggery, was that Professor Bell and I, as we would proceed through that landscape, we were often mistaken as priests. So it's a one and only time. Seminarians, well, yeah, we were young then. We were younger then. We're going to go to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And Augusto Iglesias is going to take us there. His committee was comprised of Matthew Bell of Human Collegiate. Human will join us, I think. Oh, there he is, right there, and myself. And again, the relationship here is between the city and nature.
Hi, everybody. My name is Augusto Iglesias, and I'm originally from Argentina. So when you grow up in Buenos Aires, El Río de la Plata is something you hear about but rarely see. You learn about it in school, but you know nothing about it. The river exists behind the city and the walls, underneath the concrete and the cement. And as a result, we have this saying, Buenos Aires turns its back to the river. From my personal experience, it does feel this way sometimes. But this is a strange saying because really, Buenos Aires would not exist if it weren't for its river. The city was originally founded on the shoreline. If we go back to 1853, there used to be a fort by the shore. This fort looked out onto the river to keep an eye out for enemy ships. This was the beginning of Buenos Aires as a city, and also the city's relationship to its water's edge. Then in 1865, to get goods into the city, a railway was built along the same shore. Although a small and somewhat insignificant intervention, this started a series of patterns that dictated the city's relationship with its shore. In 1873, where the fort used to be, La Casa Rosada was built. This presidential palace grabbed an important architectural landmark that once looked towards the river and turned it on its back. La Casa Rosada faces inward now to La Pampa, Argentina's agricultural land. Also, a few years later, a port was built right behind La Casa Rosada. This pushed the shoreline further out and made the river the backdrop to the city's urban fabric. But that's not all. This new port named Puerto Madero quickly became obsolete as ships grew larger and this vast stretch of land was left empty, further separating Buenos Aires from its river. Because Puerto Madero could no longer handle modern ships, another port was built in 1911. This one still operates today, and it's called Puerto Nuevo. What's interesting is that the same time Puerto Nuevo was built, a municipal spa was designed along the shore of the previous abandoned port. For a while, that brought life and energy to the riverfront, and most importantly, it successfully reconnected the city to El Río de la Plata. On a personal note, my grandma and her siblings used to spend their hot summer days here swimming and fishing. Unfortunately, the municipal spa is closed today, and this is due to various reasons. One simple reason is that the river became polluted. Also, private developers and dictators tried and failed to gain land from the river and dumped a bunch of construction debris right where the municipal spa was. We still see traces of these ambitious projects today and how they ultimately failed. For example, the images we just saw were of a proposed sports city / amusement park by a famous soccer team that eventually ran out of money. And next to it was about 900 acres of construction debris, which are the remnants of a darker past. This was a project for a new administrative center by the dictators of Argentina that were in power in the 1970s. This project was stopped, however, once Argentina became a democracy. It strikes me to think how all of this occurred just right in front of the municipal spa. My grandma used to swim, and it's even more shocking just how she saw it change in her lifetime. Over time, these massive stretches of land were left abandoned and empty, and were reclaimed by successionary growth and further formed a barrier between the city and the river. In recent years, however, the city and its officials have made an effort to turn once again towards the river. This is seen in the northern coast of Buenos Aires, away from our site, where there's a visible number of new projects along the water's edge that aim to reconnect the city with its river. The southern coast, however, remains one of the greatest challenges in that process. This part of the city is fragmented and disconnected. On one end is the Civic Center with La Casa Rosada. In the middle lies Puerto Madero, which was recently redeveloped into luxury condos and has become one of the most expensive areas to live in the city. This municipal spa, the municipal spa is here, and in front is that 900 acres of landfill left by the dictators. Together, these zones form a clear axis that lead from the city to the current shoreline. So this raises the question, how could an urban intervention at this scale become to reconnect the city with its river? When we look closer at this axis, we find a mixed bag of landmarks, parks, abandoned grain silos, a Calatrava bridge, tall towers, and a shoreline full of construction debris, all sporadic and unplanned. If we look deeper at the data, we find dense and inaccessible vegetation and high crime rates around these green spaces. When we piece that together, it forms a clear picture of inactive and isolated spaces. Spaces that without people become forgotten and sometimes unsafe. So how do we transform this into a safe, accessible, and vibrant waterfront? Through various case studies, certain strategies stand out. Improving the pedestrian experience by making it walkable and inviting, creating a strong urban edge with restaurants, cafes, and public spaces that activate the ground level, and establishing clear pathways that draw people from the city towards the river. The challenge of this site, however, is that it's quite large. When compared to other waterfronts around the world, the difference is quite notable. For example, here you can see the size of the wharf in Washington, D.C. to our site. It mainly covers the area where the abandoned grain silos are and just parts of where the municipal spa used to be. Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York, the scale starts to get bigger. We can start to cover some ground from Puerto Madero and cover the entire stretch of the municipal spa. And something closer in scale, Grant Park in Chicago, which covers almost the entire 900 acres of landfill and most of the site. However large the site is, certain small-scale decisions were made early on by looking through these precedents. For one, by looking at Bordeaux's waterfront in France, creating a threshold between the river and the city was important. By building on the empty plots of land behind the grain silos and creating an urban edge that opens up to the municipal spa, we have a threshold that marks a gateway from the water into the city. The abandoned grain silos that fall on axis with the Casa Rosada now become a backdrop that evoke Argentina's agricultural past. This small but important move begins to recenter the city, giving the water and land an equal amount of importance in the city's urban fabric. But the real challenge of the site becomes, what about the 900 acres of landfill? There is no money for transforming this 900-acre wasteland into an ecological park, and it would continue to separate the city and its river. Not to mention, it would possibly further hinder the safety of the people of Buenos Aires due to its lack of visibility and accessibility. As a result, the idea that I've explored is how much development would need to take place in order to generate the capital necessary to convert the landfill into a vibrant amenity for the city. That question led to several design explorations, each inspired by precedents from around the world. What part? The history or the? Oh, this. Yeah, I'll get into it. Yeah. This is not just, this is just showing sort of the process and the multiple iterations that I've gone through to tackle this huge landmass. And some of them are, looking at it in a more, if you look up on the boards, all the way to the left is the most dense scheme, and all the way to the right is the least dense. So this is just, just process. Some drew from a strong green core, like one in Manhattan Central Park. Others imagined a grand promenade, like the National Mall. Some proposed a gateway between the city and its shore, like Daniel Burnham's Grant Park. Others looked at context, drawing from Argentina's river culture and the canals of El Delta. Studying these proposals through physical models, raise the question of urban morphology, building heights, and how much development is too much development or too little. Should I design with a grid or more natural elements? If I have a grid, should it be parallel to the city of Buenos Aires or parallel to the municipal spa where my grandma swam? But most importantly, which urban form creates that relationship that with the river and the city? These studies resulted in a new city plan that not only recenters the city, but completely embraces El Río de la Plata. My questions about which grid to use was solved by simply using both. The civic core and the municipal spa became datums for this new plan and its grid, and the axis from La Casa Rosada to the silos, which already were improved by those earlier moves by the grain silos, were taken to the next level by carving out an entire new waterfront from the wasteland the dictators left us back in the 70s. Yeah. The natural edge of the 900 acres were left mostly untouched and became part of the new city's edge. While this new plan keeps much of Buenos Aires' DNA through its 400 by 400 blocks, this improved version tries to prioritize density, street frontage, an efficient network of alleys, and different modes of transportation through complete streets. As a result, a kit of parts was produced to study, interrogate, and question what the building to street relationship should be depending on the city's area. For example, in places where there is a waterfront or a strong urban promenade, complete streets, retail, vegetation, and tall buildings are prioritized to bring life to these areas. The streets in residential neighborhoods are more pedestrian focused with smaller roads to encourage slow traffic, but still taking into consideration other modes of transportation if need be. For the lot configurations, a similar approach was taken by taking case studies from around the world, including cities that influenced the urban plan of Buenos Aires, like Barcelona and Madrid. A kit of parts was produced that fit the 400 by 400 blocks, but could be interchanged depending on the city's area. For example, where activity was to be expected, the block could be split into two separate 200 by 200 blocks that would be more conducive to tall buildings, or in contrast, more residential areas would have a small alley going through its 400 by 400 block for trash, but also it would give these areas some green space and parking. As for the building typology, respecting the current context and its vernacular was important so the development could feel as an extension of the city and not something separate from its context. This was important to continue the dialogue from Buenos Aires to the water's edge. Now, in this presentation, I've mentioned to you that one of the inspirations for connecting the city with its waterfront was Daniel Burnham's 1909 plan of Chicago. In that plan, Burnham converted rail yards and stockyards into Grant Park, creating one of the most dynamic and memorable relationships between a city and its waterfront to be found anywhere in the world. This plan for Buenos Aires seeks to convert a massive 900-acre landfill, an abandoned grain silo, and a former municipal spa into an extension of the city that embraces El Río de la Plata and creates public parks, amenities, and a meaningful connection between the city and its river. In that sense, I advocate in Burnham's words to make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood and probably will not themselves be realized. Make big plans, aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we are gone will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Thank you.
You did go through that introduction extremely fast. So you use the terms wasteland, sort of assemblage of industrial buildings, you know, as sort of a collection of things to be discarded. We never actually saw it. We don't have a sense of what that place is like. And so I was wondering, in the spirit of your grandmother and her friends summering on that edge, is there anything that could take us into the life of what that abandoned area is? And then how, second question is how you interpreted the vernacular, respecting the vernacular.
Right. To answer that question, maybe showing in my slides. I think the images might have been too small, but let's see. There are here. These are pictures that I've taken. For example, if you look at 12, it's right at the shoreline, and you can see again, maybe it's a little too small, but it really is too small. But yeah, you can see there that the shore is full of construction debris, and that is what it's like all along this abandoned coast. And I can't remember exactly where I had, yeah. And this is a sort of a collage I did of just things I found along that shore. To really kind of, yeah, explain how this was just a dump site for an administrative center that never happened. So, yeah.
The two bodies of water on either side of the red dash line, are they little lakes? Are they low-lying?
These right here are sort of marshland that I think just yeah, it just has happened. I don't know if it was something that in the previous plan, they were maybe looking at doing something artificial there, or if it just happened naturally.
Well, whether it was intentional or not, you sort of replicated their existence with your two squares. And in general, I would say, I applaud you making big plans. And there's some really nice urban thinking here, but I do question the scale. Like it falls apart a little bit for me when I get down to that aerial view when I'm like a bird up in the air looking down at the street. And I want to get down to the sidewalk and understand what this is like in terms of a urban environment. It feels very hard and very big, like very tall, very dense. And I wonder if it needs to be, if you are creating the filter through which we enter the natural world. I mean, I could see its urban edge where it connects to the city being that hard and that high and that dense, but I think it needs to filter out a little bit more, including along the perimeter. So I look at that sort of ringish road and think, why there? Why not let the blocks kind of, you know, dissipate out into it? Like establish your grid, but then let them bleed out. Think of if that was, a green edge with a running path instead of a driving path. Could the wetlands make their way into some of these courtyards, and could you also let the architecture get lighter and softer and less formal as it's working its way out? And then I would take those areas of blue, which you sort of mimicked, and introduce that as a water feature. Could those green parks actually also somehow be cisterns or some way of dealing with water moving through this thing? Because this is going to continue to be very wet. It looks like soup. So I think you want ways for the water to channel through. It's going to flood, let the water back out again.
Thank you.
I agree with Elizabeth. I think in a certain way, your drawing suggests greater completeness than the design really has. And that's why every building is a kind of just this rectangle, and in the next level, the secondary and tertiary level of design is there. And that's actually one of the dangers of being able to draw on a computer, because you can just get it done, right? I'm concerned with, and I have a question.
Yeah.
Those are a series of locks, or?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure. Okay. What concerns me in this drawing especially is that it's this row. I'm looking for, because you've made a big move here of bringing the river in and making this gigantic urban move, which I think is the beginnings of something really, really good. But then your architecture seems to just be oriented to that and that to that, rather than working and somehow organizing itself. And so I'm looking for some kind of urban space, like in Lisbon.
Yeah.
Right. That's right on the water there and makes for a big space. And what you also saw in Grant Park.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or your lock system.
There you go.
Your lock system could provide us a secondary grain of connectivity back to the city. Like each one of these, this should continue across like a nice boulevard. Maybe that means this shifts over to meet it. And this one should continue. It's okay. It aligns with the center. That's okay. What happens here? Maybe you create a kind of green introduction and pull more of that green up into here. So I think, lightening the hand and being less hard, less rigid would help.
Thank you.
So
I appreciate this tremendous amount of work you did, and also showing us the evolution of the city, the urban morphology, how it came about. I think that was very helpful for us to understand. So if I understand correctly, I mean, Argentinians are very ambitious, and the city is an ambitious city. It wants to be a European metropolis. It just happens to be in the southern, hemisphere. Yeah, way down there. So I actually don't think, I mean, it's so unlikely that this plan could actually work. But I do agree that there's an element of, it lacks a little bit of a softness to it. It's very rigid. And I feel living in it would be very challenging, I think. But I don't know. I haven't lived in a place like Buenos Aires, so I don't know. But I think, now we think of cities differently, maybe providing an area that's like a beach, like the beach that your grandparents used, more of those. And actually, I thought about canals as well, which would be kind of a good redundancy in the case of fluctuations and climate adaptation. So a system of canals could cut through it. Of course, maybe it wouldn't be aligned with the rest of the city, but it could add an element of identity. I did find it a little harsh. And is it true that you have two schemes here? Or like
Sorry.
this one seems to have, that one seems to have kind of a denser sort of edge to most of those streets that it disappears here in these schemes, but maybe
Right.
I'm reading it wrong.
I think that no, I think that it is. I wouldn't say it's two different schemes. The context site plan where I'm showing where the brown is, those were where I envisioned taller buildings to be. And then when I looked at it more closely, it didn't just make sense for those areas to just have tall buildings, but rather the whole strip. But still, I think some sort of monumental buildings could all fall along those areas, given that they fall within these axes that are, important to the plan.
But in terms of your road network, it doesn't make sense for your tall buildings to laminate that waterway. They should laminate this waterway. If I'm going to introduce this much density, this is the line, because then you can use this series of loops to bring traffic in and out. I would have a broader street here with higher density so that you can connect back to the city with a series of, connective loops, and then let this density decrease as it makes its way out into the natural setting.
Again, one interesting thing could be to think of this, if this is a real sort of plan, it will have adaptations and it might actually, be challenged over time. And one of the things that I remember was this conversation about the plan of Tehran that was designed by an American, Victor Grun. But then the Islamic Revolution actually took over, and what they did is they loosened up the rules of the plan to allow the city to more naturally kind of adapt. And that actually led to the Tehran that I think many people want to visit today. So thinking about that as a, as a kind of an academic, but also, exercise to think about what are these kind of areas you would allow maybe more experimentation with. I think the same thing happened in Barcelona, if I remember correctly, with where do I, create a green core? Where could I alter some of the facades? That might lead to a much more real, so that could be interesting for you to just explore as a scenario. Scenario one, this gets done, but not everything gets, not all the density has the same FAR. And that will lead to a kind of an interesting sort of proposal, I think. But it's already a very interesting proposal. Thank you, Augusto.
did you look at all at inverting the plan, i.e. you occupy the water's edge with buildings and you put a park in the middle?
Actually, that was, I did explore that scheme. And from what it, yeah, it created a lot of sort of strange geometries and grids that didn't line up. And it felt that in a way it was maybe continuing to turn its back to the river. What I was trying to achieve with this plan was create like a gateway, a threshold, a very clear demarcation of the river and that axis that goes all the way back to the civic core where the presidential palace is. And sorry, the previous shore was. No.
Okay. Yeah, it is. And so there's this incredible waterfront and these beautiful boulevards and everyone's walking there. And then the big buildings are set back. So you don't need to bring the buildings immediately to the edge. And the other thing is this is all landfill. So I wouldn't have suggested to myself that anything is sacred about the shape of the dirt. Right? I would have said someone else put it there. I can take it out. I can shape it. I can do any number of things, right, to make the edge and actually put the city there. And I ask these questions not because I'm criticizing your scheme. It's simply that as the process goes, as you're doing this, it's always the self-criticism. What else could happen? You never want as an architect to get so in love with your work that you can't throw it away. I mean that.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I would echo some of those comments that I, I do want to see your grandchild bathing on the edge of the city eventually. And right now there's a big park. And because it isn't sacred, because it is leftover land, if you will, I'd love to see maybe the city come out. I agree that if you want to bring the city to the water, you have to make a much more intentional, not just have the grid repeat, but still have this big, somewhat of a barrier, if you will, so that you could still have nature as a park or nature here. But I guess this seems just like a green border, whereas I'd love to see the city engaging with it like this. Because I love the urbanism. I love how you've made that large move. But I do think you need that next level of detail. Even in the buildings, when I see the buildings and I see how it mimics sort of the post-World War II growth of Buenos Aires, that is the vernacular. That's the literal term of the vernacular. But when I look at that image up there, I think of Corbus's image of Paris, and I think, not for me, and that's maybe just me, maybe other people see themselves in that environment comfortably, but Buenos Aires is considered the Paris of South America for good reason. It has a lot of love and a lot of texture. And so I think you just need to go to the next level, both in urbanism and in architecture, and to start to give it more love, if you will.
Um, I want to say that I was really fascinated by the story of the place as you described it and as you went through it and really taking us to where it is today. And for some reason, while I was listening to it, I was expecting the project to sort of arrive at something that is about this place, that is about sort of the future. And for me, the best part of your work is across the top of the board and the stuff you really flipped really quickly on the screen. That's where I see the most of you, the most of your thinking, the most of your analysis, the most of your ideation. There's so many rich ideas up there. There's so many ideas about conceptualizing that space. These are different places. I would love to visit a number of them. And then when I look at the rest of the presentation, at some point, and I was trying to track at what point did you decide that that's going to be about pattern making? I feel like your project took a turn at some point. It became about things that it didn't start out being about. there's like a lot of sort of block making, street sections. It's like this whole board here for me is like inventing hot water again, you know? And I don't know that the richness of the problem that you stated in the beginning, the richness of the exploration that you went through really boils down to this kind of work. I would have liked to see a lot more of that kind of work. And specifically, kind of when you consider it in how do I get from maybe those early less dense stages, which is closer to today, to something that's a much later, denser stage, understanding that unless you're a dictator with a lot of money, you're not going to get to that plan overnight, right? That's the other irony that I find about your proposal is that you kept saying one way or the other how is these dictators or people with like big plans that failed over and over and over again. And I would like to see in your work a critique towards that. In many ways, am I just another dictator and I'm going to put like two big plazas and a bunch of blocks, right? And hope that it works? Or am I actually going to look at this urban planning and growth in a way that's actually maybe possible for it to succeed? I think your project is about failure. You know what I mean? And it is about how do we take now this inherited larger piece of land and make it succeed. Unfortunately, that will be the story of the future. We're inheriting a lot of things that we're going to have to make work or figure out how to fix, right? And I'm not sure that repeating the mistakes of the past, and I'm not saying this is a mistake, it's just I'm seeing a lot of these inherent kind of, oh, you know, if my plan is just big enough, then it would probably be successful, rather than I feel like your intuition initially was a lot more about how do I take it from where it is now to something of the future? And I think you have a really solid project into something like that. Um, Other than that, when I look at the rest of the work that's in the really big images, I feel like it's something to where you explored this quite a bit, and then at one point you said, "Oh my God, there's a month left to end the thesis, and I need to come up with a site plan and some three-dimensional buildings." And it really does feel that way because, yes, there's some of Buenos Aires that looks like that, but that's not all of Buenos Aires. You know what I mean? It's a very reduced kind of idea of it to a certain kind of type of Buenos Aires that you have. And it's hard to imagine that this whole new district of the future should look like, you know, post World War II kind of urban landscape. So in many ways, I don't think you gave yourself enough time to really develop what was valuable about your project. And I mean, there's some really cool stuff going up there in terms of how you were letting the water in. At one point, I was saying, like, what if there's like canals in there? And sure enough, there's the canals up there. There's a lot of richness into it that then became about kind of the more conventional street types, the highway next to the water, and there's no beach anymore. Don't let me complain too much. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of work done here. I can tell that you really care about this place, and obviously it's personal to you. And I think it's really important, this thinking. I think it's important that you care. It's important that you're analyzing it from this point of view. It's important that you're thinking about it in all of these different ways. All I can say is like going forward, like don't settle. It doesn't matter how much time is left or not left. Uh, Stay true to what you care about the most, what gives you kind of the richest ideas, and feed those. You know what I mean? And in the end, what you're going to arrive at is that it's going to be that much more powerful. It may not check every single box that perhaps needs to be checked, but it will be like really strong and forward thinking and creative, and it will be you. Um, Overall, great amount of work. I congratulate you on all of this, and I can't wait to see where this whole area of Buenos Aires goes in the next 20, 50 years. It's really fascinating. Thank you.
very much. I'll just add, everything's been said, so I think that one big thing for me will be scale. I mean, these blocks are, I mean, it's quite density. I'm not scared of. I'm a proponent of urbanity and density. It's just a matter of like most places did it for need, and perhaps there is a need here, but also cities are born organically. So to provide such a drastic, just adding density just that quickly right in one location where it's almost as big as probably as almost as big as half of Manhattan potentially here, that has this big chunk of density has districts within it. It's just so vast. So just be mindful about that, that when you're producing scale at an urban level and you're working with modules and aggregating that module, it's like it's so easy to get out of scale very quickly. And some of these buildings are like 500 feet tall. I mean, they're 40-story buildings. I mean, it's quite quick. You just instant density, and it's like, but instant density even at a lower at a mid rise level is already a challenge, and now you're jumping straight to high rise, so it's a very, so just be mindful about scale as you're creating and producing work and investigating work. And I think the precedents that you're looking at are fine. I think you should definitely look at the Netherlands and the Dutch. I mean, and the Danish. I mean, they do housing very well, and they work on sites just like this. I mean, we've been to, I mean, many people here probably been to Amsterdam or Copenhagen, where they have taken over old port sites and they've developed new housing typologies there, new districts, new in density, but they've done it in a way where it is still very humane. And you have to think about, as a person, master planning level might make sense numbers wise and, big picture wise, but you do have to put yourself next to these buildings and go like, you're trying to convince us that that's a very, you know a good place to feel and to sit and to be within the urban context, like being in New York. Yeah, there's places where it's uncomfortable, right? There's like, when you have a building that's 200 feet tall or 300, 400 feet tall, and then you have a little sidewalk and that's it, and then you have rush of vehicular traffic. Some of those instances happen here, and it's not a very happy place to be. So you just have to think about grand vision, one thing, but you really have to put yourself in that context. Yeah.
Thank you.
I disagree with what a lot of that's been said. From the following point of view, I think that sometimes we tend to look at things too much as architecture and not enough as urbanists. And I think if you take an urbanistic point of view, I think the problem is a little bit different, which is that you're mapping out the development of something that would occur over a long period of time. And a lot of cities have been that way. The 1811 grid of New York took a long time to infill. Washington, D.C., 1790 took forever to be built out. I think the comments about the architecture, sort of you water it and one day it pops up, are probably true. And I think probably that's the result of the fact that, this for you has been a kind of love letter to Buenos Aires at one level. So when we talked about the street widths and the relationship of the heights to the street widths and things like that, your response typically was, well, that's the way it is in Buenos Aires and things. And I think that one could also say that maybe the project should exist as a critique of some aspects of Buenos Aires rather than something that is always going back to that for its source material. I do think there are many cities that have had a grid laid down and then got filled in and then an open space next to it. Chicago is one. It's got Grant Park on one side and then the grid of the city on the other side. So the idea that somehow we need to infiltrate the green in with the grid sometimes, yeah, you could do that, but I don't think that's the only way. And in fact, there's a lot of cities where there have been distinct edges. Boston Common, Boston Public Garden, and the rest of the city around that is one that comes to mind. So I think that that's probably, at least in my mind, where you were trying to go. One of the things that was an interesting conversation among all these different schemes that he showed up here was, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to just add buildings, or are you trying to add a part of a city? And it always came back to, well, I'm really trying to make a part of a city. And some of these solutions, the reasons why I think they were discarded was because they were fragmentary and not terribly complete in terms of what they were really trying to do. What I admire about the plan, I think in many ways, are these two big parks. The fact that if you're in one of these blocks, and I don't want to look at these two drawings because I think they're not the strongest part of your scheme, but you're never more than 3 blocks away from a very large open space, whether it's a park or the canal, which I think is really great. You have access to all those things. And I think that's a nice way to think about urbanism. I think the parks would be activated. I think were you to take the next level to try to, sort of get your arms more around the sort of buildings that populate this and how this could be maybe 50% like Buenos Aires, but maybe address some of the things that Buenos Aires isn't so good at, probably you would get there. What I admire a great deal is the simplicity of the grid. A lot of great cities just have, simple grids. Barcelona has the sort of fancy version of things, but New York and Chicago and San Francisco and these places that we hold up as paragons of urban virtue have sort of similar situations. So I think from an urbanistic point of view, what I think this is trying to do is to lay a roadmap out for how to make a habitable space on a vast territory that would grow over time. And to me, the most cogent comment so far of what everybody has said is, how would you show this? How would you phase this? How would you see this happening over time? How would you inhabit it initially? And then how would it grow? Because New York City at one point in time was a city of row houses, but it changed. The other thing I would say is when you look at that change and you look at tall buildings, I think one of the problems of cities like Buenos Aires and stuff is that it's not enough like New York City. I mean, the New York City zoning code of 1916 that controlled the skyscraper was perhaps the most brilliant invention relative to the growth of the modern city and zoning rules to control it. How could something like that be implemented and things? So it would, in fact, sort of engender the rest of those kinds of questions. When you look at this big park up here, I think about the big parks in San Francisco. That's probably even bigger than some of those places. So one of the challenges for Augusto was getting his arms around the scale of this and just trying to kind of come up with something that was urban, not just fragmentary, because a lot of these things, at least the critique we talked about, was that they were very fragmentary, that had a cogent sense of center and edge and its relationship back to the main spine of the city, which I think it does rather well. Once you get beyond that, when you go from the basic planning move to the interface, urban design interface between the planning and the architecture, that's when you start to call into question stuff like this.
Thank you. And just for people to know, I want to thank Matt Bell and Brian Kelly and Professor Kuliji, Brian was my chair, and then Matt and Kuliji were my committee members. So thank you.
Augusto, this is very impressive. I have a question. I think you've gotten great comments and critique, and most of the comments are about the kind of the relationship between the two districts you made and the park and all the wonder. I've been looking at all the wonderful process schemes on the top, and the question I have more for both for you, but also the guest here and the commentators is the south edge of the new canal that you've made. So when I look at a number of the schemes up here, you're engaging both the north edge and the south edge of that canal. But then in the kind of the scheme that was developed on the bigger boards, it's incredibly dense on the north side, and even in the context plan, you draw it kind of with the same representation style on both sides, but then in the site plan, there's this kind of boundary line. That and then that kind of delta area are the questions I have.
Sorry, when you say, I'm getting a little disoriented here because you mean north on
This
plan or north in?
Well, this area, yeah. I was saying plan north. So
Okay.
this area here is developed in some much denser ways
Yeah.
here. Yeah. That. Does that speak to what you said? Well, it looks like, there's some new stuff here, but it's very different than what's being proposed up there.
Yeah, so I think that for that lower portion, the southern portion of the site, um, we were looking at possibly having, maybe like an important landmark, like a convention center around here, and most of the focus was right here on that axis, like I talked about with Bordeaux, sort of flipping the narrative of the urban fabric and making the city a backdrop rather than the river being a backdrop and recentering it. And then here, if I were to take it to the next steps, I would possibly look into densifying further here to create that relationship between the two canals. I think kind of like Matt Bell was saying, I think a lot of my emotion was put into this, and this is almost a historic area, not like it's written down historic, but it's where my grandma used to like walk around and get in the water. So I kind of wanted to leave it untouched. Um, but la abuelita, la abuela Mimi. But yeah, I hope that addresses your question.
So stay right there. A very quick question. So where can we have the beach?
So here, I was thinking maybe somewhere around here. Sorry, I want to like my shirt's gonna get on all tugged, but here, and then hopefully, you can jump off the bridges.
No, I know.
Yeah, well, so
I'm just looking for the beach in the plan because in the end, you're hoping to do all that so that you can bring the vibrancy and kind of that exuberance of life back to like the reconnect people to the water.
Mhm.
I think it has to be in the plan, whatever phase it comes back in. It just the question is within sort of the formal relationship and the new kind of you have a second canal kind of cutting through it. Like where do you see that central
right.
gathering?
So I was being, yeah. Is it okay if I just address something real quick?
Pass it back to.
Okay, because one of the schemes and it was maybe I don't want to say purposely not discussed in length was the ability of possibly because since the river is polluted, possibly filtering the water as you can see through here and having it or through here and then having it come out, so that this could be clean water and for people to be able to swim there once again. So that was explored, and this plan does take that into consideration. So the swimming area, all jokes aside, would be once again the municipal spa in this plan.
Augusto,
The reason why I ask is because this is a make no small plans kind of move. It goes without saying that if you wanted to begin a process of cleaning at least a portion of the river's water so people can reconnect, should be a part of a big plan like that. Because it's such a large, big kind of connection, relationship, reconnecting, reestablishing something in the project. So I asked it not being to be facetious, but really to say, where can we have this incredible urban amenity? So thank you.
um, I'd like to build on that and actually push that same question a little more. One of the things that's phenomenal, you see it in Tel Aviv also, was when you look at those old photographs, the beach is adjacent to the urban area, right? There's that walkway and then the beach is right there. And right now you've separated it. And so the activation of the urban, of all those shops, and then you have the walkway and then the beach is right there. Right now, I have to go pretty far to get to the beach. And you can say it's in the canal, but that experience is a very different experience than being at the edge of the city and, having the extension that water offers. So I wonder if that, that seems to me that somehow this key relationship that was a heart of it and the activation of that space at night. I mean, like I can think of the beach in Tel Aviv. There's dancing on the beach. There's eating on the beach. There's people walking at night all the time. And it's a kind of urban edge space, right? And they're walking in their bathing suits, the same kind of scene that I saw in Buenos Aires in your pictures. And so that really special edge is now it's removed. We have the canal, but then we have this, this next grid, and then we have this kind of romanticized, naturalized edge. And I wonder if there's a way, maybe it's that it extends a little bit more, your main street or something gets carved. I think Alan's point that someone just threw those rocks there, you could have put them in another way. I would love to, think about how you could bring that energy, that back, right?
They all want a beach.
It's not just the beach, it's that kind of urban beach.
Yeah, no, I understand completely what you're saying. And I think that's definitely a next step. And I think that the right place for that would be right here where that municipal spa is, and possibly looking at sort of speaking to that previous comment of, well, how do you really clean this up, clean up that specific area, start swimming in it, and create that urban promenade that would activate that space. The other sort of conversation that I've had is that once this is clean and you have a lot of activity happening up here, naturally, people would want to, to go back into the city, would maybe filter through here, and, that cross pollination would possibly activate that as well. So those were just conversations we had and definitely next steps that, I should take into account.
I want to address a couple of things. And first, Matt, I agree with you. We need to think of it as an urban problem and not a what's the design of the building problem. And I think where the disconnect happens is when you go from that and you can say, okay, that's a massing problem. And then you go to that where it's no longer just a massing problem. Right. Yeah, just flip that around. I think that's exactly right because between that and that, the scheme is binary, and that's it. And I think that's the problem. I can accept that. Yeah, this is your massing problem, and it'll grow. I think that maybe moving the buildings to the edge and changing the edge, that's another approach. Right, it's an approach to it. You make it work. I think going to your point that if you're really thinking about it, you're showing something in the plan. It may not be the right thing, the correct thing. It may get worked, but you show it. You can't say, yeah, and then the people will go to the water and that'll make it a beach, right? That really doesn't work. And I have one last question for you. On that bottom row, it says current typology of Buenos Aires. Can you tell me what the typology of Buenos Aires is that I can learn from those three photographs?
Right. So quite frankly, more like the comments have been, as all the reviewers have mentioned, definitely more of the architectural typology and the research of that needs to go into account for this thesis. And frankly, what I was trying to show with these Google Earth images was the density of the city, so that in some ways would justify the density of these perspectives, while also showing the street relationship and how that street to building relationship is happening in these dense neighborhoods, which are quite popular in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, I've been to Buenos Aires a couple of times.
Oh, great.
It's an amazing city. It really is an amazing city. What I would do is take my last question and say to myself, I have to learn what a typology is. Because if I don't know what it is, I can't use it as a tool to design buildings or design cities. Oh, what I said is use my question to say, okay, I have to learn what a typology is. If I don't know what it is, I can't use it as a tool. And basically, for you going forward, for all of us, it is a tool to understand how to, the problem was done. How did they solve it? How come this became an idealized way of solving it? Okay. And what I see there is an aerial photo of Buenos Aires, and it doesn't tell me anything that's particular to Buenos Aires except that photograph over Buenos Aires at that moment. Please.
So, yeah, what I was going to say also about typology, which is obviously a recurrent theme today, is that you have spoken about typology, but as you said, we don't really get a sense of what it is. Typology is not only about form, but it's about massing. It's about looking at actually texture and detail. And it's also typology of urban spaces, right? And so a little bit more study of those at a larger scale would be really useful. And finally, did you look at how Latin American architects are reinterpreting this kind of urbanism?
So to address that comment, whether I looked at how Latin American architects were addressing this urbanism, no. I quite frankly didn't look at many. I mean, from the precedents that I've picked from around the world, places in Europe, in the United States. I couldn't find any sort of Latin American urban architect that would, or some precedent that would address this problem, especially because some of these urban designs are done by Europeans in Latin America. So
So I'm glad you mentioned urban space as a typology as well. And for the students here, I want to make you aware of we had a discussion at lunchtime. The major media that you use on a daily basis is prejudiced towards making objects. Computers do not have a palette of components that are spatial. And most of you just spend a lot of time just arranging a bunch of objects that add up to, well, maybe nothing, I don't know. And you really need to, and a lot of this, so the beautiful thing about drawing with your hands and modeling with your hands is you can actually model space just the way Michelangelo would have modeled the spaces between the arms and legs of the David or what have you. We talked about typology the other day. I told them a little story earlier on about courtyard typologies, just to be honest with you. So so that my students that I've led are not immune to this deficiency, Michelle. Look, this has been a great conversation. This is something you've had a lot of passion about. Really the first real urban design that you've had a chance to wrestle with. And it's not easy. It's just gigantic. I would have never given you, if we had met early on and said, you know, you wanted to do an urban design project, I'd never given you a project this big to start with. I would have had something perhaps a little smaller, but you came up with this. Everybody noted at the very top, the part that Alan Dinerman loved, the sort of piece from Clockwork Orange where the images were flashing rapidly in front of him and his eyes were held open. You don't even know what I'm talking about, Clockwork Orange. All these images across the top was the moment of intense creativity in the project. And then there were a couple of versions of this. And we ended up at this fairly early on, and it got very static very quick. There was almost a reluctance to roll tracing paper over the top of it and modify it. And this guy over here and I kept trying to get you to do that a lot. And then there were successive enlargements that were done mechanically and not, again, with hand. And the beauty of doing it by hand is that, I should say, the danger of doing it digitally is that just, if you want to get it larger, it just makes the same thing bigger. And then you realize you don't have any more ideas in it. And so there's no more information here than there. And so that's something to think about. This tool, which you didn't talk with any of the people about, was really good early on when we had a whole bunch of chiclets to move around on here. And I wish we had done more of that. But I wanted to call people's attention to the fact that the graphic here and here, which Ronit, I think you were one of the people had said that it looked like this area was not being developed kind of synchronous with that area, the area up above. But if you look at the model, it's gridded. It's not. It's gridded as lots and potential development areas, and not as buildings. In the plan, it's drawn as buildings, which are probably way too. They're landscapers as opposed to skyscrapers. The last thing I'll just say is that these came extraordinarily late. Probably everybody here will say they love to walk on Fifth Avenue in New York, because you get a sort of 3, 5, 10-story base to buildings that, despite all of the hustle and bustle, basically mediates the extremely tall buildings that step back from those places. And the bases, the middles and the tops are not all the same. And that 3-part lesson is something that I think might be something worth going back and thinking about. before roll. I mean, you didn't even having done it on the computers, you can go back to this thing and kind of beat it up a little bit before you roll it out to try to get a job. You can show folks another iteration of that. But I think that this stuff, there should have been a lot of freehand studies of what this stuff meant. In a way, it's come out as though somebody starched your underwear. You know, it's just too tight and not comfortable. And if it were freehand, it would have been more forgiving. And it would allowed you to more fluidly examine like that, like some of the drawings that we were looking at as an intermittent. Look, you've learned a lot. It's been a lot of fun. This guy, you know, I had to rope him in. He had to pass this semester on being on any thesis committee at all. And I said, I need you. And so he came back. So thank you very much and congratulations.
Thank you.
We're gonna, and I'm sorry about dropping the model. People need to know this. You never put a model where I can touch it. I can destroy any model. We're gonna face this wall over here, folks. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're facing this wall over here. This wall is gonna rotate. Stay put. Stay put. Yes.
There's one more. There's one. There it is. Very big.
I mean, that's not that. Just
Straight from Quito, for Venus is fine.
Oh, good,
So
good,
it's out.
good. She's gonna have to. Yeah, you know, and I was just trying to be saying that. I just have the letter. Thank you for asking me that.
Yes, yes, we don't need it.
What he does seem good.
So the problem is our 3.5 years. 2 years.
Dave Howerton has a wonderful architecture and landscape firm. And they can great.
Okay, if everybody wants to. Oh. Excellent. This is the last one. Yeah. So folks, this is our last contestant for this afternoon. Alec Howerton is going to show us where the water goes after it gets flushed down the drain, and perhaps a better way of thinking about that. Jana Vandergoot was the chair, and Peter Noonan was also a committee member.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Alec, and as Professor Kelly said, I'd like to thank Professor Vandergoot for her help throughout the semester, Professor Kelly himself, and Professor Noonan as being part of my advisory committee. And I will be going over today Where Water Works, an educational approach to public infrastructure. Kenny? Now, here in the Chesapeake Bay region, communities are facing stronger storms, aging infrastructure, and limited access to nature. If you're from the region, you may remember the intense floods that happened to Ellicott City in 2016, 2018. We've seen the destruction, the displacement, and the potential solutions that these events can have. Also in the region, the combined sewer system and stormwater strategies in Washington, D.C. are deteriorating and impacting regions downstream. These strategies were first implemented around the turn of the 20th century and continue to be a vital piece of the infrastructure for the city. And then lastly, limited access to nature comes with the privatization of land, and specifically along the coastal shorelines, with private residences acting as a barrier. You can see in that diagram, to the nature spaces. Access to these spaces are in fact limited. Now, with that said, there are three themes that come from these analyses: water restoration, experiential learning, and personal connection. The worsening infrastructure and stronger storms in the region call for water restoration mitigation, whether it's something more natural or industrial. Overall, most of our awareness of these vital systems is obsolete. That is why educating the next generation about these systems is important. And to broaden this awareness, personal connections are the secondary educational factor, where people can share their own knowledge and ultimately share their experiences. This brings us to a conversation about the separation of industrial and more natural water treatment. The typical industrial water treatment plant is private, blocked off from public, leaving us in the dark about what this vital system is. And treating water through our natural wetland systems occur in public waterways, which are accessible through boats and public access points. Now, can these two very different but similar systems intersect? Or if they do, what does that look like? Well, the answer is yes, they do intersect. Through my initial research, I started looking into projects that intersect this private industrial treatment with the public realm. Starting here, the Columbia building is located in Portland, Oregon, and it took a water treatment facility and added a public building that displays the water treatment process like a gallery space. Trotted Water Filtration Facility, which is located in the Bronx, New York, was a treatment facility with a added segment of recreation, as in a golf driving range. You can see that. So the treatment facility is below, a couple stories below, and then the golfing range is above. And then lastly, in Shanghai Hutan Park, located in Shanghai, China, they turned a former industrial site into an ecological park. And ultimately, these three precedents show that these two programs do intersect, but how can we go beyond the sight lines on the ground? And that is through education. So from that, we will look into how architecture can facilitate the treatment, ecological, and personal aspects of the water treatment process. This thesis looks into natural driving forces of the gravity, which is forces of the natural movement of water, which is through gravity, and exposing these elements that are traditionally hidden from the public and points of intersection where people can learn about these vital processes. And that brings us back to the Chesapeake Bay region, with Washington, D.C. on the left side, Chesapeake Bay in the middle, and Potomac River meandering northward. And looking at adjacent schools in this region along the Potomac River, there are several opportunities for school children to get involved in this ecosystem that is so dearly close to them, physically and emotionally. In addition, looking at the various ecological sites located on the Potomac River watershed, there is Piscataway Park located here, which is a state park. And it is important to be aware of significant dig sites that can potentially interfere with this project, whether that's excavating the ground or, as you may see later, stilt construction. And this project was designed as if it were to be expected to find a significant archaeological site, so mitigation plans that set suit following the discovery. And that brings us to zooming into the site, Piscataway Wastewater Treatment Facility. It's located in Accokeek, Maryland, in Prince George's County, right along the Potomac River. And you can see here, you can see the Indian Head Highway that runs right next to it, which is a major highway in the region. And this treatment plant itself is at a prime location for this thesis intervention, considering its proximity to the state park, the plethora of schools, and the private shoreline at Piscataway Park. After visiting the treatment plant and getting the tour from the operations manager, I realized the beauty of this location. It's nestled against the Piscataway Creek, located to the north, and then flanking dense forestry, and then again, like I said earlier, that major highway. Its 300 acres include the whole wastewater treatment process with supplemental office buildings and operation buildings. And in addition, there are 3 holding basins. Let's see here, 1, 2, 3. The most west basin holds approximately 20 million gallons of water discharged from the plant itself. And then the 2 basins on the east side hold approximately 30 million collectively. And to orient everyone, here are some photos from that site visit. And as you can see, the site is covered in green, contrasting the mechanical systems that you can see here. And in this image, located down there, you can see the connecting point for the basins. You see it, yeah, in that image right there, that release valve that is hanging above the water. It's a intersection point where these holding basins are released back into the water treatment process. So water that enters there can ultimately be embedded into this system, the treatment system. Towards the west side of the site, this includes the operations of the last moments of the treatment process, which is 7 UV disinfection and then 8 the effluent channel, which is where approximately 30 million gallons of water a day is released directly into the Potomac River. And in this treatment plant, there are many additional operations to effectively treat the facility's water. Wastewater enters, like I said earlier, the site at the effluent station, the influent station. And in this, the water runs a series of screens, clarifiers, and then the next steps, the water is pumped to train blowers, which oxygenates the water, and then finally more filtering and UV disinfection. And ultimately, this produces a grade B water quality that is then released directly into the Potomac River. Now, looking back at the holding basins, there are these berm conditions. You can see there are 3 berm conditions that kind of separate these holding basins. And the berm conditions that dissect the site and allow stormwater to run off through, like I said earlier, gravity and flow down the change in elevation. And you can also see that release valve again, which pumps water back to the raw station. And then from this section, you can see that these berms act as a liminal threshold between this natural creek zone and then this industrial water treatment zone. Along the most north berm of the site, located on Potomac River, the Piscataway Creek, you can, along the north berm, a gravel pathway that is used to oversee the operations of the plant, acting as a main circulation corridor located here. Also at the site, the soil types and floodplain makes a zone a critical wetland opportunity, and having these wetland conditions give way for a particular focus on that north edge of the site. And you can also see in this red dashed line the floodplain that is about approximately 8 feet above 0. With the site considered, I next looked into the architectural precedents that showcase stilt construction, like the Loblolly House, which is located on Taylor's Island in Maryland, And then the photography studio and workshop highlight the wall assembly and the shading systems, while the houses in the Netherlands seen here kind of look at the natural materials and how elements can come together, like the thatch roof and the cedar siding. Now, looking at the Piscataway Creek watershed, there are ample opportunities to return this north shoreline back to the creek and educate people about how vital water is to our society. And now, with that said, let's get into some architecture. And with this proposed conditions seen here, the main elements of the design includes the gathering house, the learning labs, the immersion lab, the treatment wetland, and the other small scale viewing spaces to watch this process work. A major site move includes the opening of the berm, you see here, and returning that holding basin back to its critical wetland zone in Piscataway Creek. And then also the main approach to this north edge of the site is through this road right here, and you enter the facility through a secured gateway and then make your way up to the north edge. You can see here that approach elevation showing the relationship between the holding basin and these series of buildings. The parking lot forest to the right of the drawing, you see there, is initial step into this water filtration process where the gravel ground permeates water runoff back into the ground and the adjacent creek. Next is the gathering house. Here is where the personal connections are created and shared among visitors. Whether it's sharing personal experiences about living in the area or sharing art with common members of the community, here is where voices are heard. From the parking lot forest, you enter the building here on this pathway, and you're greeted by the gallery lobby space. Across the gallery and lobby space, there is the assembly space, and it's a double height space that can house organized events, and ultimately that knowledge and those experiences are shared among the community. And also in that double height space, there is a mezzanine space that looks over this water treatment process to get a view shed of what this facility is operating with. And in the gathering house is that mezzanine view shed in that heightened space, and it gives view shed to this critical process. And thinking of the assembly of these buildings, the structural framing consists of glulam beams and columns that support the CLT roof panels. The initial building has a thatch roof. You can see in these elevations, this smaller building, and it's approximately 1.5 feet thick. This large stone wall you can see in this northeast elevation acts as a threshold between the initial step of the water treatment process into the treatment inlet, which I will get into in a second. Now, this southwest view is showing the first ponds in the wetland where the settling pond flows into the aeration pond. It was critical to place circulation at these transition zones so that visitors can visually see this process and learn through visual elements. And as I started to mention earlier, the treatment wetland incorporates a settling pond, an aeration pond, and a polishing pond. Separating these different zones is a system of stone weir walls, you can see in that diagram. Stone weir walls to allow water to flow over top when the water quantity is greater than what the holding basin can hold, and flow into the next zone for treatment. Then separating these treatment wetlands from the larger proposed inlet, we have a system of corrugated metal sheets and 10-inch wood pilings that hold and retain this water from creeping into the proposed inlet. And then at these rear wall moments, the learning labs, you can see in that perspective, flank the treatment ponds and provide space for visual learning and seeing the process in action, learning by seeing. The first zone, the settling pond, slows down the flow of stormwater and allows for debris to settle and decompose at the bottom of the pond. Species of plants like cattail, picklereed, and spatterdock further filter out pollutants and retain nutrients that are harmful to these species and the water quality. And now moving to the second zone, the aeration pond includes a meandering path of stone and groin logs where stones and these perpendicular logs to the topography kind of agitate and move this water that gives oxygen back into the water. And then finally, the polishing pond, made up of more stone and vegetation, acts as this last step of the treatment process before it enters the proposed inlet. And these last steps polish the water by absorbing contaminants through the roots. And then it was then released into this treatment inlet. Moving into the learning labs, visitors are introduced to two small all-season classroom spaces, standing on stilts. The building uses more timber framing and a thatch roof similar to the gallery building that you saw moments ago. On the skin of the building, operable shading devices with glazing panels can be closed to make the space more intimate. During the colder months, faculty can use the propane-powered stoves that heat the space when the sliding screens are closed. And there were also, you can see in that render, an assembly of trusses that kind of imitate the motif of the hoop house, which is traditional and typical in these kind of industrial spaces. And also it frames, even though the gable is a high height in this small space, that bottom chord of the truss kind of frames the lower space. And here the relationship between the built form and the wetland is visible. On stilts, they're on 10-inch wide pilings, and the edge of that building is approximately 6 feet above the ground line of the treatment inlet and about 3 feet above the treatment ponds. And now moving down to the immersion lab, this is where people can be physically immersed into the water. Learning about vegetation systems and aquatic life firsthand can amplify this overall environmental awareness. And whether it's walking across the walkway, the covered space at the lab is for more formal classroom setting. And then the stairs that lead down to the docks are where it's more hands-on activities where students and teachers can get into this water and experiment with the fish, the grasses, do some planting, canoeing. And again, this lab incorporates similar shading devices and heating strategies as their learning labs, but instead use cedar shake rather than thatch on the roof. And then lastly, this thesis did look into the in-between spaces of the design, simply getting view sheds and providing space for calm leisure. The observation pavilion here is a covered space looking out to Piscataway Creek. Here, the observation deck has the view to the open skies and more view sheds to the creek. And to conclude this presentation, this intervention joins the public and private realm of the water treatment process. It not only strives to educate our future generations, but also restores this shoreline along Piscataway Creek. And through water restoration, experiential learning, and personal connections, this project showcases how our vital infrastructure systems are what keeps our daily lives moving. And bringing awareness to our source of life is vital to our continuation as a society. And I thank you all for being here, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna start.
Please.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very clear, very well organized, very thorough, very well rehearsed, researched. Congratulations for a very complete project.
Thank you.
I think you're going to hear a lot of good things along those lines. I also want to compliment you on the quality of your graphics and just in general of a very competent and thoughtful design proposal. I think your future employers will be really happy to see this
Hope so.
presentation.
Any watching? Just kidding.
In general, there was a really systematic, thoughtful approach to first understanding how the water treatment works and designing an experience and a series of structures that are both, like you said, experiential, but also educational. I think it was easy to follow and understand the use of the spaces and how they relate to some of these things. And then, as I understand it, the actual treatment facility is still kind of offsite.
Correct.
Correct. This is kind of more or less museum version of the process.
Correct.
So all that said, I want to make sure that you hear all of the praise first. The one thing that I struggled with when I was listening to you the whole time is trying to understand what the thesis is here. I think it's a very successful design project, but I don't quite understand the thesis question, subject, or even resolution. To the extent to which the project doesn't augment necessarily in any way the existing industrial processes, it doesn't even introduce some of these natural ones. As you know, water treatment can happen, including that industrial process, but there's a lot of other ones.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on it a little bit when you introduce some of the natural plantings in these, but there's a lot more you can do with this water. You can grow fish and you can do like all these other things that the project kind of shies away from. But in many ways, the project doesn't push on the process. And the process in many ways runs independently from this project and these buildings. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on it, but I'm trying to understand what is the question we're trying to answer here, or what is in many ways the step forward that the thesis is offering?
Yeah, I think starting off, I initially was looking into some research. There's this ecologist named Nina Marie Lister, and she kind of talks about the idea of designer ecology versus ecological design. And then she kind of pioneers the fact that designer ecology is more like a replica or a showcase of these natural systems, but they're not imitating the natural systems. It's an abbreviation of these systems for purposes of education or awareness. Um, yeah, so it's more focused on that kind of summarizing it and broadcasting it to the community.
Were you able to develop a design thesis, like a thesis statement or a thesis
Yeah.
problem? What is that?
It was looking at connecting these public and private realms that are typically hidden. How can architecture put these processes on display and broadcast it to the masses, essentially? I don't
Yes.
know if that answers.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you for this, because that's kind of where I was going. In my mind, the innovation in the project was about turning a place which is otherwise an industrial treatment facility, right? That maybe curious folks go and check out.
Yeah.
Nobody else
I've
does,
been there. It was
unless
interesting.
they're on a school trip. But how can we turn this into a place that can actually be normalized and be in many ways integrated into the community and in an educational sense, so to speak? But what I would challenge here is like, in what other ways can this be, in fact, integrated or made more available? Because as it stands right now, at least the way you've presented it programmatically, this would be another school trip or some kind of planned event with an educational or scientific sort of purpose. And I'm just wondering, if you were to take it one step further, are there other programs and uses you can potentially hybridize it with, or even bring a new use to the site that partners well with this educational, naturalistic, or at least nature forward approach, or perhaps, industry slash nature? And just so that it takes it even to the next step, if we're not merely just showcasing what's already there and making it kind of more palatable and more interesting, more humane, but we're also bringing this other activity. We're making it there. Just something to think about. It just reminded me that when we were doing this many moons ago, there was this trend at that time of like hybridizing uses, like being able to bring two sometimes incongruent uses, but by doing that, you sort of elevate or enhance or make the other one more exciting. I have no preconceived notions. I'm not saying anything like that needs to happen here, but I'm wondering if you've covered the subject of showcasing water treatment to an educational and kind of cultural sort of audience. What else is there that could be brought to the side that can further activate it? That's what my mind was going off while I was looking at it, but really good work.
Thank you so much.
I think that's a really good comment, the idea of hybridization. And you identified the Croton treatment plant, right? Where Ken Smith was layering a golf course over the treatment plant, right? We know Ken Smith, right? He's cheeky. He's doing that because he's being provocative. It's not because he likes golf course design, but he's interested in the idea that you would bring folks who typically go golfing, who might not be super aware of processes of water purification, whatever else. He's bringing a public that's not usually associated with questions of environmental justice or whatever else to a water treatment plant, right? And so there's a tension that he's building there between the program and the publics that are invited. And that's a little bit maybe what I'm hearing here is like, how can you amplify or tweak that, right? Because this is gentle, it's beautifully done, very well crafted, but gentle in its critique, I think, of common treatment practices.
Back on that and say, it's gentle. Your presentation was gentle,
Thank you.
but I'm not sure you did a great job. And I can't even like find the drawing that shows it. I'm not sure you did a great job showing how you weren't gentle. You took what is a highly engineered berm from the Army Corps of Engineers, and actually Piscataway Park is a national park, right? So this is a federal site.
Federal.
Yeah. You took a highly engineered berm and you chopped it up. You made it into an inlet, like you broke it down and you replaced it with a living shoreline, which is almost the opposite. It's the opposite approach, right? Like you're letting the water come in, you're letting the sewage or some of, the grade B sewage out, right? To me, that's very provocative, right? To take down this berm that was protecting the Potomac from the sewage, but not really, and say, let's build back the natural wetlands that do a better job protecting. So in my mind, that's the primary, well, not the primary, that's a huge program. That living shoreline that you're starting to introduce back through planting wild rice and cattail and, potentially harvesting the cattail, harvesting the Phragmites, which that's thatch, right? So you're harvesting invasive species and you're using it on a roof. That's a bigger program, right? That's a bigger precedent that you're setting for the whole shoreline here in this area. There are other living shorelines, but they're harder edges, right? You don't really have the educational aspect.
Yeah.
And I think you're introducing that, and that feels really significant, and maybe even like kind of heavy-handed in a good way. But I think it was a little bit hidden in the presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Or not said. Yeah, exactly. Didn't get that. Yeah.
I don't find any of those things that you just described on the boards. I don't see the berm, I don't see the cattail plantings, I don't see. Yeah, I'm just saying like what we have left to look at for our discussion, which just means to me in your self-editing, perhaps they weren't. Well, that's, well, he passed, yeah. I wonder why it didn't make it onto the, well, actually the one that was more important was the one that shows, go back a few more slides. There you go. Yes. How come that material didn't, when you were selecting what would make it onto the boards, how come this material wasn't selected?
As in the vegetation materials? That was a element that was kind of saved for the slideshow, if I were to say that. Wait, that's why they're not on the boards, but I do, correct.
Yeah, some rendered like it's, in your renderings, sorry, I know I'm supposed to, like, sorry. In your renderings, this looks like a wedding venue. It doesn't look like a treatment plant. And if we're hybridizing program, maybe that's okay. But then I would want to see a bride on the edge of the dock getting her picture taken, right? I mean, to me, the presentation expresses a kind of neither here nor there. It's not aggressively educational or didactic. It is also not aggressively a gathering or an assembly or an event space. So I feel like it's a little bit washed out. And I wish that I had a better understanding of, and maybe that's what you're asking when you say, what is the thesis here? What the essential, the thrust of the project is, right? In terms of its like intellectual heft or even its architectural heft, the problem you were trying to solve.
Yeah, my question is, so I've been an architect my entire career, so I just have to buy into that the science of this, right? That somehow you take down this berm that the Army Corps of Engineers has put in, and you've come up with a better way of treating the water. Okay, I'll just buy into that's true. I have no idea why you have these two little buildings here. I don't know what they do. I really, I'm kind of lost in that respect. I don't know what the little buildings along that path.
Those are the learning labs, which is kind of that informal classroom space where it's open space. Typically nowadays, there's a educator and then there's a classroom of children that are either sitting in a circle, a lot of circular movements. That's why it's a more of an open plan
They're
for those.
basically one-room pavilions.
Yes. And a lot of times in the region, a lot of the learning is by being in the spaces themselves. So trying to make it as or more permeable or more view sheds outwards, more letting the air come in, the smells, the sounds. Mhm.
You don't need, I mean, as long as the weather's okay.
Yeah.
You don't need.
Yeah, well, and during the colder seasons, I did mention the shading screens with the glazing, and then with trap in heat from the propane heater.
I appreciate you try to combine this kind of landscape challenge, which is what do we do with, this water and treat it, and then how do we reveal it? How do we make it so that people can participate in the knowledge about the water cycle and the challenges, as well as the architecture? But I think the landscape, I mean, I agree with some of the comments. It doesn't seem to be neither doing one or the other. Like the architecture is to me, is very timid. But even the architectural elements that are connected to the buildings, which is this kind of boardwalk, is so sort of thin that even a landscape architect wouldn't be able to do it, that way. Or so in a way, I mean, a little bit more realism, and then maybe thinking about what is this armature that's supporting this kind of new system of occupation? Could it be the levee, and then does it really need to be the boardwalk?
Yeah.
And I find that maybe just kind of acknowledging the levee that you chopped for a reason, and then making that the armature or the structure around which to build sort of your new plan, I think would have been interesting to me, because then you would have the river on one side, the real thing, and you would have this other kind of machine that's taking care of the cleansing water. The other thing that I mean, you would have to add handrails to anything that's above 30
inches.
30 inches. So imagine the sort of the purity of some of the forms that you showed, the almost Japanese like sort of, architecture would be lost in all this kind of infrastructural thing that in a way the levee would have taken care of. But I mean, I think that there's some really interesting fragments of it. The parking, the forested parking is something. So there are like patterns and interesting elements to it that are maybe they just need to be woven together as a story, as a richer story. And maybe we want to get a little bit of the learning that the kids would get.
Okay.
So to take us very close to that, that learning at the end. But I mean, it is a very valuable sort of contribution to something that we haven't done yet. This kind of merging of architecture and landscape next to this kind of water. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think it's a very elegant design. It's very beautifully done. And I think maybe part of the criticism might be your style is understated, it's quiet, and that is part of the elegance, but it's also like when you look at that, it knocks you over. And then here it draws you in more because of just the graphic part. But I think it's an interesting juxtaposition having it next to the wastewater treatment plant, because you're sort of highlighting the importance of how nature does this naturally. You're building this bit of artifice to do it, but it's kind of like the site down on North Capitol where they used to use these big sand filtration areas. That's how we used to clean our water. We would just mimic what nature does. And up where I live in Silver Spring, for example, they have a creek where they've set up these little dams, and they're doing what I learned in camp once, which is, well, when you hit the white water, that's the water shedding the crap, and then it keeps getting cleaned as it does that. So I see that you're doing that, and it's very nice that you're going to bring the kids there, and see them in the natural context right next to this big sort of dystopian,
Yeah.
modern thing. So I think they're going to learn a lot from that. But I have a dumb question, which is like, how do you get the water to begin this trajectory?
Yeah, looking at the topography lines, there will be some manipulation, but there is, you can see along here, there is topography that currently these two basins are filled with stormwater. So the stormwater from the site enters into the basins. So this region, you can also see it in this diagram, how the topography kind of channels to this front part. There is some manipulation. It's not totally existent, but it starts underneath the main building, essentially. Yeah.
I think everybody, what's been said are great comments. One thing I just want to add is, we in previous years we had done a studio where we were playing with machine architecture as machine and machine as architecture, and we went to York, PA. York, PA is an interesting place because there's a lot of these industrial tours. I don't know if you've been, but you should go. There's like a really cool tour of the trash incinerator there, and it's really interesting because you just really see a process become architecture. Very, and so one thing I just wish that might happen more. I think there is that challenge of like, well, what's this versus what's that? What have you created versus what's existing there, and as a facility, as architecture as machine versus maybe architecture as is reflecting on machine. I kind of wish there was some kind of connection or some process that says that you've overlaid maybe and says, hey, there's a facility that does this and it's very celebrated and it sounds like you've researched it. I wish I would have saw more maybe analytical modeling of it, just so we can understand it even more further than just that sort of two-dimensional diagram, but like something that shows us architecturally and spatially what does that look like, and then how does one take your educational aspect and go like bring those people through the facility and then maybe end here to reflect back and to think about what I just saw, and might be a place where it is a little bit more calmer, a little bit more pristine, I guess, maybe because maybe the process is not so much pristine, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn from walking through something that's a little bit more machine-like. So I think the project warrants that that thing that says, hey, I'm not trying to be autonomous to the other thing, that I truly want to tie it all together, and maybe something that brings people through that and ends here, and back and forth. There's that dialogue back and forth. I think that could be interesting because I think right now for me they just feel a little disparate, and unless I missed it, there's like if there's a procession or a physical, you know, connection, or there's like some kind of systematic or programmatic connection, I might have missed that. But if there is, great. If not, then I would continue to work on that.
Appreciate that.
So I think I have a couple questions.
Yes.
First off, great graphics, beautiful presentation, like everybody said. I think for me, what I'm hearing about the program and kind of the way people go to the site, it's almost like a visitor center for the wastewater treatment plants. But I think then there's a sort of interesting contrast between the way the architecture seems very residential and the small scale, like there's multiple houses almost in a row, versus the program of a visitor center. Maybe you can talk to me a little more about how you came to that final decision on how the architecture is expressed.
Yeah. And I think, which is now looking back, it's something I definitely should have included. But I was also initially looking into the one-room schoolhouse motif, that how there's a single gable and then there's a center line access procession down through that. So in terms of form, that's what it was initially started as. And obviously it expanded beyond that into like kind of pushing and pulling these volumes to create a more dynamic one-room schoolhouse.
Nice. I think in future I would definitely bring the one room schoolhouse, make sure the image is there and the precedence. Yes. I think as well, one thing I had a question about is your use or your pulling from vernacular architecture, but I saw examples from the Netherlands, but I didn't see examples from here. And I know it's Piscataway Creek, the Piscataway tribe lived there. I'm wondering if you were also inspired by maybe Native American vernacular buildings.
Yeah. I would say initially the indigenous, obviously the Piscataway Park is right next to this site, so obviously I was very conscious and being mindful of my role in this project, not to, um, yeah, just knowing my role in this project. And I think most of that indigenous side was kind of pulling into the materiality, kind of those natural tones and kind of expressing the lifespan of these materialities, whether it's the grass from that are located in the inlets all the way to the thatch roof, whether it's a tree that's made into siding, whether it's poplar bark, siding, cladding system, more of a materiality.
Yeah, yeah, I could definitely see the materiality. I wonder if maybe there was an opportunity somewhere to pull in sort of the form, I don't know, like a
Yeah.
wigwam, like kind of the organic form somewhere, maybe the immersion lab or maybe the final view at the end of the boardwalk.
I was
or the gathering
initially,
space.
if you
Yeah.
look at this learning lab, the bottom chord of that truss was kind of
Ah.
initially was symbolizing that wigwam motif, but again, I was recognizing my role and not really trying to mock or imitate certain architectural styles. But yeah, I guess that's inevitable.
Just to pick up on that, because I think it's a critical question given the site that you chose, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. And we had a lot of discussions about it, and Alec came to classes where members of the Piscataway tribe presented and talked about their kinship relationships with wild rice and cattail and how they use the mats. They talked about the architecture at Piscataway Park, which right now is the National Colonial Farm. So it represents the, more the one-room schoolhouse, log cabin, colonial style of architecture with the cedar shingles. And one of the initiatives that they've got going on is to, as they adapt and rebuild some of the structures that are falling apart, they're creating a kind of hybrid. So they have a log cabin kitchen building and needs a new roof, and they're going to use cattail mats because they think that story of hybridity and adaptation is an important one.
Yeah.
I think, Alec, you were a little shy about that part of the narrative, and I understand the reticence because it is, it's a complex
Yeah.
story and narrative, and maybe one that you don't feel fully comfortable telling. I think there were other stories in your thesis that you did feel more comfortable telling. But I think you could have talked about, like, part of the site visit and part of your collaborations and conversations have been to, work with the Piscataway tribe and hear from them. And that maybe a real life version of this would directly involve the tribes people, and architecture might start to shift because of that.
Yeah.
Alec, I just want to circle back around, having heard the last three comments to this idea of what's the thesis of this, and I think you've heard in a number of different ways, and it just struck me that during your presentation, you gave us sort of like the seminar talk of the water filtration portion of it, and then you moved into now let's see some architecture. Remember that? It was such a abrupt jump in the presentation, and I think having heard a lot of the things from the comments that you're hearing is what's missing here is really the making of the architecture, because you have such facility with drawing and visualizing buildings, already. I think sometimes you forget that not every building is architecture, and, architecture sometimes doesn't manifest in buildings. And I think there's a lot of building making happening here, but there's a lot of stories that we're hearing now that have formed that. And I just want to make sure that you remember not to omit that next time. I think it's really important that you back up your decisions with specific ideas, with specific conversations, experiences, anything that is context, anything that relates to this, because it makes it that much more valid and that much more powerful. I think at face value, you heard about it, this could be a wedding venue. It could be any visitor center. Like take all of the mass timber and all of that. And I've seen quite a few that are rendered in this kind of sensibility. So it makes it that much more important of why is it of this place? Is it the Piscataway tribe? Is it this? Is it that? Or like Kyle was even saying, this form could have been entirely different if it started with the industrial thing and then humanized it and brought it into the site. It could have been, it can be a number of different things, but your job is to make sense of it, is to sort of help us arrive at your design and be like, yes, this is it. This is the only thing it can be because of what you did. And I think that's where, even when I was still searching for your thesis, that's where it also lost me. There was the disconnect between the beautifully illustrated design project that I'm seeing, the topic that it's really encountering, and sort of that connection, the architecture making, sort of got lost in between there.
Thank you.
I just want to add my compliments for your project. It's really nice. I think you've gotten some very valuable feedback, and everyone should pay attention that we used to have the tradition that every thesis had to have a short paragraph with text highlighted of their thesis statement, which would on the presentation, right? That would continue to evolve over the course of the semester. So I think that would help anchor. I think that the reviewers and faculty commenting on your thesis have expressed some of what I'm feeling of the way the project could go in another iteration. And I want to go back to the theorist that you mentioned, designed ecology versus what?
Designer ecology and ecological design.
Yeah, so I just want to, play devil's advocate and say, what if you critiqued that and said, I'm not going to do designer's ecology. I'm going to let the ecology be what it is and then place the architecture within that. And so I think it has more to do with allowing the industrial piece to be what it is and then working around that. I also think that for many projects, not only because I teach adaptation, but it's super important to clearly illustrate the before and after conditions, like Jana jumped in and talked about, that it's essentially you're making a fairly radical reversal in something that's been done and reverting to an earlier state. So I think it's super important to say that up front and when it becomes a portfolio project.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, so my thoughts are going to constructed ecologies as well. And I think it's in that's where the critique of the work is. You're critiquing the normative conventional processes of wastewater management that are happening just a stone's throw away uphill. But I think there are ways to kind of heighten that a bit, right? So I appreciate that what you're doing is you are constructing an ecology and allowing that ecology to do the work of filtering water, right? But there's an example that we can look at when Paris modernized its sewer system in the mid 19th century. It created the most kind of technologically advanced sewer system in the world underneath the city. And all of that wastewater, rainwater, solids, whatever else would get piped out and it would end up in a newly constructed sewage farm. Okay, acres and acres of farm where there was productive farmland. The biosolids were serving as fertilizer, essentially, right? It's something we used to do in this country. We don't anymore, but it has been done and it's still done around the world. But not only was that happening, but the Parisians created these itineraries and this recreation around it. It became like an event. You would go out to the sewage farm, you would drink a glass of filtered water and see the dirty water coming in. At the end of the process, you would drink a glass of clean filtered water that had been cleaned by the root systems of all these vegetables. You would eat the tomatoes and the carrots. These are prize-winning vegetables. They're written up in the newspaper. They get sold at Les Halles, the famous markets in Paris, right? So there was a spectacle around this constructed ecology. And again, it brought publics that usually wouldn't be involved in this normally hidden process of wastewater management. It brought it to people's awareness, right, through the spectacle. And so again, like my thought is that I like where this is headed. The scale of it is small, especially relative to the wastewater treatment plants adjacent to. At the very least, what I would suggest is that you start to create an itinerary. If there's an itinerary for school children, it should start at the conventional wastewater treatment plant and say, here's what we do in America, right? right? Here's where we've landed here in the 21st century. We throw chemicals at it. We ignore the waste solids coming out. We treat it as these solids as trash as opposed to fertilizer, whatever else, right? And then the kids walk downhill. Maybe they're following some of that water that's on its way to getting polished and treated. And then they experience the way that wastewater has been treated for centuries, right? Through constructed ecologies, as you've shown us so beautifully with these arrangements of plants and water depths and all that careful calculation, right? So I think I wonder if there's a little more to do here in the work of heightening the contrast between what you're doing and what is normally done. And you've set it up, you've been super provocative by positioning your work next to something really conventional, right? And now I think you just need to kind of like turn the screw and really heighten it a bit more. Just some thoughts. Thank you.
You next to a jump, right? It's like here's this the sanitized, or here's the cute version. I mean, I know why it's important to teach this, but I mean, like, it's cute, right? It's made for children, I guess, but it feels when it's adjacent to something which is scaled for industry, which is scaled for the city, it feels too fragile, too cute. And I think one way, just even in terms of you telling this story, would be to talk a lot more about the wastewater and where it's coming from. Like, what part of, Southeast, Southwest Washington is being cleaned by this facility, and how much is your little piece impacting what's coming to it? All around DC there are signs placed that this is part of the Chesapeake watershed. Like, how do you, I would have taken the project in a different direction. I would have made it less about being demonstrative, and I would have made it more about having an impact on the city and having an awareness, or this part of Prince George's County. I don't know what area is feeding this treatment facility, but I suspect it's a pretty large area. And
Not as big as Blue Plains.
okay, which is more of Northwest,
Yeah.
Central and Northwest Washington. So yeah, I think there's more that your building could do to educate people about this as a piece of a much larger network, and making them aware of when they go home, not just about how wastewater is treated, but how the choices they're making in their home are impacting the Potomac River and then ultimately the Chesapeake. That's the kind of punch in the face that I think it's missing.
Thank you.
Doing the Phil Donahue thing.
Hi. I'd like to pick up on that comment and some of the others because your thoughts sparked an association for me. So I think about those buildings along the Chesapeake Canal that were where the lock masters had to be, right? And so there became a type that you would find all on the canal. And so I was curious to know, and we see this in some of the other parks, I was curious to know if you imagined that this could be, the first one, but it actually becomes a whole system of small buildings in different places where we have some of these issues with water, and maybe there's something inside the city also that could you imagine this becomes, um, you know, the first of many, or that you start developing this kit of parts or ways of thinking so that you don't just come here, but you find it somewhere else in other places where we're trying to do a better job and understanding the relationship of wastewater to clean water and the edge. So that would be, that the education isn't just in this place, but it's part of a larger system.
Yes. Am I answering that question?
Please, if you have something.
What was it?
It was a question.
Yes.
The answer was yes. Okay. Who else? Yana? Bring it on in.
I feel like I've spoken too much already, but I think you've received a lot of really excellent feedback, like very rich discussion about potentially next steps, right? So when you think of this for your portfolio, or when you think of your sort of career path, I think there's more here to dig into. I think you should go back to school for landscape architecture so you can do this thesis again and address the landscape piece of it.
I'll get tuition remission.
Yeah, the punch, right? And I think because I watched you through this whole process and I was there at the meeting when you were designing the system and you were looking at the watershed and you were looking at the infrastructure. And I heard the committee say to you, this is an architecture thesis. And I remember meeting with you afterwards and I saw that you wanted to pass. And it was like, it was a valid concern, right? That you wanted to make sure you had time to develop architecture drawings. These sections are beautiful drawings. You spent a lot of time developing those as architectural, you know, the tools that architects use to think about buildings. And so I think you didn't have time necessarily to produce that middle scale plan that we all wanted to see, which is somewhere between this and that. You also didn't have time. You made a strategic choice not to do ecological design. You made a choice to do design or ecology. I think the committee pushed you to do that. So, I mean, that's my reading of the meeting where you switch scales. So my challenge for you is, like, as you move forward in your career, you're going to get all sorts of feedback, you know, like all sorts of different feedback, and you're going to feel the pressure of what you need to produce to do a job, or to do a job well done. And I think your voice, finding your voice and trusting it and going all the way with it is something to spend time on. You've been in my studio, you've been my TA, and now I had the honor of working with you as a thesis student. And I know you have, you're a really sensitive approach. You definitely have a voice. And I think you're learning to trust it. And I saw you do that in this thesis. And I would say, like, push that even more, you know, so that everybody, you do give the gut punch, right? Trust yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Alec.
Thank you, everyone. Before everybody gets up to leave, a couple of things. I want everybody to just turn around and wave at my laptop for a second. We have all of the 60-some members of Gensler who are Maryland alumni in a meeting there. They can't hear us, but if you just wave,
I have a job.
they're having a meeting about supporting the school. Wave at them, Professor Bell, former students of yours. I think they're waving back so they understand this is live. Hey, look, before I bring everything to closure here, we had two wonderful lunches 2 days in a row. Today's lunch, Zachary actually got in the car and went out and brought it back, which I thought was above and beyond the call of duty. So in his next PRD, make sure that goes in there. That's my contribution to it. For the students here who are in the last phases of completing their documents by Friday and turning them in by COB Friday, which is the deadline, not January something or other, as might have been said before. We want to thank Brendan for getting us to this point where we can do that. Brendan's one of the advisors. He's a fantastic guy, and he's been helping us get this done. Fabian and Kenny, we wouldn't be talking to each other, or we wouldn't be looking. We couldn't do this without you guys. So thank you so much. The visual research, sorry, the Fab Lab. Where's Marty? Is Marty still here? Marty has made it possible for, not many of the models made their way into here. There were a lot of models back there that should have come for the final presentations. And Yelena was making sure that all this was appearing on the web. And I want to thank all those people. I want to thank our guests this afternoon for spending time with us, and I want to see if there's any kind of concluding remarks from our guests.
I would just say, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to commend the students. Thesis is It's my favorite of all the semesters, because we are able to see as educators where your empathy lies and how that impassions your thinking and also your career as you get out there. And the things that you've been chewing on in your thesis project will stay with you, and you will return to them, and hopefully you'll develop expertise in these areas, which feeds you for a long time. So I really enjoy seeing that. Thanks for sharing your empathy with us and showing us who you are as designers. And I wish you all a long and productive career.
My only comment is, it's for all of you. Was anything said up here or any discussion that you had a question about that you kind of couldn't ask because you're not part of the panel?
As far as I'm concerned, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me, Brian, and it's a great opportunity to be here from the from landscape architecture coming up here. It's always kind of a great rediscovery of the landscape. You look at the landscape slightly differently than we do, but you showed a lot of sensitivity to it. And I'm so appreciative that for many of you that has been the starting point of pretty much for all of you. That is the starting point of a great investigation of architectural form. And I think, yeah, this dialogue, happens once a semester or once a year for me. When I come up here, I hope we continue that dialogue with all of you, because I think there's a lot of really rich sort of soil to grow, grow things in. And then I think I'm very encouraged by all that I see. I think you have great futures ahead of you. So don't, hang in there. Maybe the economy will not be the best, but I see there's enough talent here. There's enough talent here to really to feed, to get into the profession and make a great success. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and congratulations on very beautiful presentations. It's very notable that there was a big variety of projects, and dare I say the S word styles, which I appreciate because that's the world you're going into, and you should be able to work with all sorts of conditions and all sorts of people. So I did appreciate the huge variety, from the massive urbanism to the incredibly sensitive work. Yeah, no, so it was lovely to see. And as far as the future, as bad as things might get, it always sets up the rebound. So, you know, um, it's gonna be a lovely spring when this winter is over, and we just have to sit through it. So good luck for your future.
Those are really encouraging words, indeed. We can all appreciate them. I also want to thank you all for all the work shared today. It was really great to see. And it was mentioned earlier, there's the empathy and there's the land-based projects. That was my observation as well, at least for today's presentations. I can't speak for yesterday's, but there were common themes. There were subject of resiliency that we saw both in sort of fire and storm resiliency. There was a lot of water management and land reclamation, right? I noticed as well that there's a theme to a lot of the projects. They all resulted into architecture and some sort of building, and perhaps the landscape portion of it was underdeveloped because that's not necessarily the end game of a lot of these presentations. But I'm very encouraged by this bigger thinking that I'm seeing, because it wasn't too long ago when it was just buildings and buildings alone. And it's really great to see that you're introducing this other level of complexity that is very real, and that is upon us, and it is something that we're all going to have to work to resolve. The previous cycle of architectural work in academia circled a lot around building reclamation, like there was a lot of adaptive reuse and things like that. Now that we've ran out of buildings to reuse, I think there's like a body of knowledge established about that now, and a few different ways of approaching it. I like the fact that now we are handling that on this larger environmental, more continuous not just urban, but also natural landscape approach. And you're all part of creating that new body of knowledge, right? Everything that's going to enhance their profession going forward, the way the previous 10 years of studying old buildings and what to do with them did. And it's exciting to see that we're expanding with that, the boundary of the design knowledge. So thank you all for that and for your contribution.
Thank you for having me. I'm sure you guys are tired. Go drink.
Comments? I think for me, it's been an honor. It's been great to see all the projects and again, all the empathy. I will say, though, I graduated from this program doing my thesis here. This is the first time I've been in an in-person review since I graduated during the pandemic. So seeing seeing how everybody's rallied together, and again, seeing physical models, it's so great. Yeah, I think just hopefully you all can take away good critiques for your portfolio, little bit of touch-ups, and move on forward. And I look forward to seeing you all as colleagues in the future. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you all, and thank you to all of the students this semester. It's been really great working with you. We had 16 people we worked with this semester. We saw 14 presentations today and yesterday. All 16 have really had success. Two of them are taking a little bit more time for personal reasons to move forward, but they're successful as well, and they're going to be even stronger next semester when we see them. If we could, before we leave today, get this place kind of shaped up a little bit. If any of you want to rehang your projects on the walls just to keep the space looking like it's a school of architecture and not just a blank slate, it'd be very helpful. And I want to thank all of you for being good sports and turning around to wave to those folks from Gensler, because my other job is Associate Dean for Development. And this was a fundraising thing for the Gensler Scholarship. So when I saw you all waving, they waved back. This made a connection personally with them. 60 folks on there. Professor, yes, sir. Heck, why not? Why don't we just put them up and yeah, because otherwise this place is going to look dismal over the break. Is that a possibility to just hang them, Professor? You think so? That means yes. Okay. Thank you all, and the best to everyone here. Bye-bye. Well done.
Anytime you need me, give me a little warning.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll have to message. I'd love for you.